Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to introduce to you Michael Marzolini.
Thank you very much. It's very much a pleasure to be here. When I saw the council members here this morning, I thought that maybe I should change my topic to voter attitudes in November. For some reason, I seem to be preoccupied with the election issues this month. I always enjoy giving public opinion briefings to government decision makers such as this, because unlike quite a lot of the audiences I talk to, you may actually have some idea what a pollster is and what a pollster does. And that wasn't the case about 6 years ago when I first met one of my highest profile clients. My first meeting with Jean Chrétien, who was at that time leader of the opposition. I was ushered into his office by Eddie Goldenberg, his executive assistant. He said, "Sir, I'd like you to meet Michael Marzolini. Michael is a pollster." So Chrétien waved me into his office over to a sofa. I remember it was a yellow sofa, vinyl, with a tip of a rip in the side. And I sat on that sofa and I looked at him. He just stared at me. This went on for a couple of minutes. His lips compressed a bit. Finally, he glared at me and said, "Well, aren't you going to fix it?" Sometimes between a pollster and an upholsterer. Public opinion is civilization's most powerful currency. It starts and ends wars, changes governments, creates new markets for new products, strongly influences all the activities and decisions made by not just the private sector, but also by government. Today, public opinion impacts on municipal governments in Ontario more than ever. Indeed, with respect to public opinion, municipal government is currently at a make or break point in its history. Within the public opinion environment, the positioning both of local government itself and its elected officials who represent and maintain that credibility will be especially critical in the upcoming transitional period of reform. How the public views the new sets of reforms, their understanding of the new challenges that you face, their preferences with respect to service delivery, the value that they expect to receive from each level of government, and their trust in the system and in the people are all prerequisites for positioning yourselves within the public opinion framework. Now today I'll be providing a briefing on this public opinion framework, what Ontarians are concerned about, what their mood is, what they expect from the future, their views on key provincial and municipal issues, and even an overview of who they trust the most when it comes to best representing their interests. I'll be presenting both findings and analysis. Pollara is a strategic polling firm involved in the measurement and, most importantly, the management of public opinion. We like to look at ways of shifting public support toward our clients' interests and away from their opponents. Now, first off, it's important to always bear in mind that the public is still very much focused on jobs and to some extent the deficit, but has recently been growing more and more concerned about health care and education. As you can see here, Ontarians' concerns continue to be job-oriented. They show their highest degree of concern for unemployment. However, you'll notice that the deficit, which was once a very close rival of jobs for people's attention, has now been surpassed by health care. The provincial government, much like the federal government in 1995 with respect to the deficit, through very aggressive communication surrounding deficit cutting, has first raised the level of public concern and then alleviated it. Now, what is useful in this chart is not just what is here, but what issues never appear. And when we ask this question, what in your opinion is the most important issue facing Ontario, for people to answer in their own words, so far nobody has ever answered the downloading of welfare and child care costs in the municipalities, or the question on which level of government pays for policing, water, sewage, or libraries. The reason issues like this here are not salient. Property tax assessment is an issue like this. Even during its peak of controversy about 3 years ago in Metro, only 6% of the public ever named market value assessment as being the most important issue of concern. Further probing on that position, on the issue, showed that even among homeowners, as people who should be concerned about the issue, 44% of homeowners had no opinion on the issue. They told us they didn't know enough about it. be in people's minds, an issue must be clear-cut, must be well-publicized, and must be easily understood. The megacity became all three of these, but even so, the referendum polling that was done during that referendum showed that Metro Torontonians were not voting on the service delivery aspects of Bill 103, but much more on their attachment to the local communities. And like the Charlottetown Accord referendum, partially to reflect their attitudes toward the government in office. Now, economic literacy has a great effect on governments, and this is what we're talking about here. The lack of pickup on market value assessment, the lack of pickup on downloading in terms of the most important issues. It's an economic literacy issue. We have a country where 40% of Canadians don't know how many millions are in a billion, 25% know what a deficit is, and only 11% can read a balance sheet. None of them work for Eaton's, by the way. So this really impacts not just corporations, but also government. Now, federal and provincial governments, they're lucky enough to have myriad clear-cut, well-publicized, and easily understood issues to deal with. Municipal government often doesn't have those opportunities, and hence the public is usually far more uninformed and sometimes as a result less interested in most municipal issues. So when Ontarians are asked in our focus groups what their municipal government does for them, they always get stuck after mentioning snow removal and garbage collection. And they do that in different orders depending on what time of year that we ask them. And as a result, the average person participates less in local government. With a 35% average turnout rate in elections, municipal elections, they display not just a lack of knowledge about the issues, but also their lack of concern. Now, my pointing this out to you has less to do with my recommending some sort of public relations campaign for local governments, as it has to do with trying to make it clear that while you live with municipal issues on a day-to-day basis, the public does not. And many of the current reforms that are under debate and the issues under discussion are going right over the heads of most Ontarians. Now, all the polling results that I'll be reporting, and by the way, these results are from our Perspectives Ontario quarterly study, survey of 1,000 Ontarians on a quarterly basis, giving accuracy of plus or minus 3.2% 19 times out of 20. I'm actually required by law to tell you that. Whenever I report a margin of error for any of our surveys, I always think of the two pollsters out hunting deer. An animal jumped out. First pollster fired, bullet went 3 feet in front of the deer. Second pollster fired, bullet went 3 feet behind the deer. Two pollsters looked at each other, winked, both yelled, "Got." I'm not allowed to tell that story around Alan Brock. While top-of-mind concern reflects really what's in people's minds, this chart here, assisted concern, shows what's in their heart. It's not contradictory. Rather, it measures latent rather than salient concern for issues and shows in many cases a very high degree of concern for comparatively very low-profile issues like education and the environment. Now, focusing on the deficit rather than on jobs has been a very strategic electoral policy for the government. Why? Well, people concerned about the deficit tend to be PC voters. People concerned about unemployment tend to be Liberal voters and New Democrats, as are the people most concerned about education, healthcare, and poverty. However, an unintended consequence of the deficit focus has been the building of a view among half of the population, even among Conservative voters, that the government has been cutting healthcare services drastically, leading to this rise in concern that you see here. Another issue which has emerged strongly over the past year is education. Both education and healthcare are currently more worrying to Ontarians than they ever have been in the last decade or so. Now, two issues that are not as important as they used to be are taxation and welfare fraud. Both have fallen dramatically in concern since the provincial election as a result of government attention. And downloading services from the provincial government to municipal governments is near the bottom of the list, although 41% of Ontarians are still very concerned about it. Now, issues with both high latent concern, or latent concern, depending on what side of the pond you're from, and low top-of-mind concern. The low top-of-mind concern are useful to government decision makers, as dealing with these issues shows leadership. Even though these issues weren't necessarily on the national last night, we discussed at the water cooler and all the offices on a daily basis, have mentioned that they will strike a chord in people's hearts, evoking a level of concern that they didn't realize that they had. politicians and governments who address these issues are seen to be far-sighted and leaders rather than followers of public opinion. So here we see at least two-thirds of Ontarians mentioning education and healthcare as being very important to them, though comparatively few, in case of education, only 7 people in 100 mention them as top concerns without first being prompted. Now, in the span of the 6 short months, the pessimistic mood pervading the public has almost completely turned around, and has turned around for the better. Last fall, two-thirds of Ontarians thought they were in the middle of a recession, and two-thirds of them believed that things were going to get worse economically before they get better. Since that time, we've had roughly 3 million people in this province have become more optimistic. We now have more than half of the province saying that they believe a recovery is underway. However, Ontarians do not yet feel they are sharing in this recovery. Personally, they're working hard for a standard of living inferior to what they expected to have or experienced in the last decade. Nearly 4 in 10 people expect that they or a member of their immediate household may lose their job before the end of the year. Pessimism on that question has really not improved over the last 6 years. And just as worrisome is that more than half of Ontarians expect that their income will fall behind the cost of living throughout 1997. Only 8 people in every 100 expect to make real gains this year. Most of those 8 people are living in Metro Toronto. Now, the blame for this state of affairs is not fixed on the provincial government or the federal government, or of course municipal. Rather, the public thinks of Ontario as having shared in a worldwide recession, for which the province or the country is not really responsible. However, it's important to recognize the difference in the public's expectation for society and for themselves. Being under such personal financial pressure, and as pessimistic as they are, they will not accept under any circumstances any further taxes, no matter what services they're offered. Despite this pessimism economically, there's still plenty of political opportunity here. Any message of hope, of jobs or growth will find an extraordinarily receptive audience among the residents. And hope should not also be abandoned by people in the public service. Right now in Ontario, 7 in 10 people continue to view government as a source of hope, as a force for good rather than a necessary evil. It's clear that a large majority of Ontarians are not quite ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, it doesn't mean that Ontarians endorse any grand new plans for government intervention in new service areas, nor does it mean that they would fail to endorse transferring services from one level of government to another or to another sector. What it does mean is that Ontarians are extremely practical about service delivery. They always have been. Now, this worldview, based on practicality and experience, is what is setting the public's priorities for government service, not ideology. For a number of reasons, when the current government came to power, the public's priorities were not limited to, nor were they fully canvassed by the common sense revolution. The most important taxation policy for the provincial government was to shift the burden away from the middle class and onto the wealthy, not to pass an across-the-board tax cut. Now, this policy is a direct response to the personal economic pressures being felt in Ontario homes every day. It's in this context that property tax reform can really be sold to a very always wary public if it's adequately explained. And the second highest priority was for the government to fund health care adequately. In fact, 3/4 of Ontarians say it's so important that they would actually accept a tax hike to pay for it. But they don't really mean that. In practicality, we tested this tax would have to be fungible only to health care and not deposited in general revenues if it was to be applied successfully. As we see it, a majority would favor action on the social side of the ledger. What is most interesting is the fact that comparatively few users think it's very important to make users of government, or few Ontarians think it's most important to make users of government services pay the true costs of those services. There's still a great deal of resistance to that type of across-the-board policy in Ontario. And this is always important for you to know as you begin to consider new ways of funding new responsibilities. Now, this worldview is not just setting the priorities that Ontarians have for government, it's influencing how Ontarians are currently evaluating the performance of their governments. A majority of Ontarians give the provincial government high marks for their handling of the deficit, and a plurality are positive toward their policies dealing with welfare abuse and taxation. These are all very showcase issues for the present government provincially. No other government in Canada outside of Alberta seem to be doing such a good job at dealing with the deficit and at dealing with government spending. The government's activities have also served to reduce public concern over welfare abuse and taxation. What used to be top-ranking issues have now been addressed sufficiently to reduce public concern. Indeed, with respect to the recent tax cut, our polling shows that it is popular with 7 out of 10 Ontarians. But for many of these people, though, the tax cut is like eating an entire box of chocolates. You know, they want it, they tend to enjoy it, but they're really worried about the after effects. Now, the after effects or the consequences of deficit cutting are less positive. As you've seen from the previous slide, nervousness with respect to education and health care is very high. The reason the government's treatment of both is not rated all that highly. Now, as a result of the provincial government's aggressive action on the deficit in their first year, the public sense of urgency has tended to fade, and the appetite for further cuts has declined. And new concerns with respect to social programs have emerged, and they've emerged pretty strongly over the last little while. So now you find fewer people willing to endorse blanket cuts, and a nervousness developing about the potential for harsh consequences of those cuts. You know, people's views are softening in this province. Now, this has important implications for many of the changes the government is making in terms of the services it offers and delivers. Many Ontarians are no longer willing to make sacrifices on the altar of fiscal responsibility, either the provincial or the municipal level, for the sake of the books alone. Changes now have to be backed up with solid, substantive reasons why these changes make sense, and how they will improve service delivery, and most importantly, value for money. The public will embrace change on those terms. And as we'll see a little later, the public is now ready to embrace a wide variety of change in how services are delivered, as long as those services become stronger and better, are not put at risk. I want to diverge from the current public opinion environment to touch briefly on the public's mandate for the provincial government. As we've seen a number of times in this province, most recently with the previous administration, there are often differences between the agendas of the people who elect government and the government itself. Now, there's fewer of these differences exist between the Harris government and its own supporters. The week after the 1995 provincial election, we asked PC voters to tell us in their own words what PC policies were the most influential in motivating their support. They told us that the welfare reform workfare policy was the most influential by a considerable margin over the tax cut. For those municipalities considering participating in such reform, this is very important information for you to have. In the end, when the government's electors look back in 2 years at the performance of the government, they will have expected the welfare reform policy, the top priority, to have been acted upon. But ultimately, this responsibility is out of the provincial government's hands and in yours. We also tested each common sense revolution policy with voters by asking what they were in favor of and what kind of priority they would place on it. And essentially what we had was 3 tiers of policy, or three tiers of priority. In the first tier, the high priority issues had a great deal to do with cracking down on various spending abuses. However, when that top tier, within that top tier were promises to guarantee funding for law enforcement, for classroom education at 1995 levels. The medium priority issues, while also still overwhelmingly favored, were less of a priority for the public, and at the top of this list is 30% tax cut. Now, the Ontario government has set some very clear priorities for all levels of government to concentrate on. This means that other non-core services will have to be discarded or trimmed in some way, shape, or form in the coming year. The Ontario public understands this and they support it with certain caveats. The reasons why have nothing to do with ideology or hardening of the public heart. Instead, the public perceives either business or the non-profit sector to be superior to government in a wide variety of ways. For example, business is seen by most Ontarians to be the best job creator, the most efficient, and the most competent. The non-profit sector is seen to be the most trustworthy, the wisest spender, and is concerned about all Ontarians. Now, governments, as you'll see, need improvement in most areas of service delivery, but importantly, there seems to be as superior to business in their concern for the public interest. Now, this doesn't mean the public gives a blanket endorsement for the privatization of all services or assets, despite the fact that most people favor the concept of privatization. Actually, about supporters of Ontarians favor the concept of privatization for the reasons that we just discussed. While a majority believe that many hard services, such as transportation or broadcasting, can be better handled by business, soft services such as public housing and childcare should remain out of the hands of self-interested business people. This means that the disentanglement of services between the province and the municipal governments will create a tremendous opportunity in the coming years. And the foundation of that opportunity is public trust. This is an extract from our Public Trust Index. We measure and continuously update some 50 or so professions. As you can see by some of the ones placed here, municipal governments are far more trusted by their constituents than either the provincial or federal levels. Nurses top the list, as do almost all professions that have an altruistic nature. Business leaders, and those who have a more transactional relationship with the public, tend to suffer in comparison. Just under municipal governments, which you'll find near the top of that list, you'll notice that pollsters also rate highly, as they rightly should. So I've often heard it said that the pollsters are just statisticians who never had a personality to become accountants. This right here is very important in terms of messaging. It shows you can beat the war of words and who you can't. Public trust is the foundation of every relationship, and your high levels of trustworthiness provide you much opportunity to capitalize on the challenges that are ahead of you. By the way, you notice the car dealers is at the bottom. I've often wondered about any provincial politicians who Now, our work in various communities across the province and doing community vision exercises, program evaluations, and service satisfaction surveys have really shown us that people expect more in the way of new, creative, innovative service delivery systems from the municipal government than from any other level. They have a very high expectation of efficacy. So these trust numbers are very, very important. In summary, I tried to do two things this morning: give you a briefing on the public opinion framework in which you must operate, and provide positioning direction on how to enhance the importance of the very vital issues that you're concerned with. I'd like to just go over some of these trends and opportunities that really have emerged. One, while the Ontario government was elected with a platform of policies that were in tune with public opinion, the implementation of many of those policies has caused the public's priorities to diverge and change and soften over time, especially with respect to social programs. Two, Ontarians still see government as a force for good rather than necessary evil, but they want governments to stick to what they do best, provide soft services. For services of a more transactional nature, Ontarians will tend to support alternative service delivery mechanisms, ranging from outright privatization to private-public sector partnerships to new innovative relationships with nonprofit partners. Three, the disentanglement initiatives mean that municipal governments will now have vastly increased responsibilities, which will now be more clearly demarcated and understood by the public. Further, municipal governments will now be assuming responsibility for many of the kinds of issues and services that Ontarians have already seen as being the top priorities for government. These issues are clear-cut, they're well-publicized, and they're easily understood. The formula for being a top-of-mind issue of major importance. This will place municipal government squarely in the public spotlight. It's a tremendous opportunity to help draw the public into a process which 65 of them rarely get involved with. People are finally going to sit up, and they're going to start paying attention to municipal government. Maybe not as early as this November election, but almost certainly by the time the next one rolls around. And that level of increase is going to keep on increasing because of the increased role that you're being asked to take on and the types of issues that you'll be dealing with. Expect higher voter turnout levels, more volunteers in political campaigns for those people elected, and more political contributions. Also expect more and better candidates for jobs and stronger competition. Now, admittedly, the glare of the spotlight and the difficulty in the managing within the public sector are not going to make your jobs any easier. It's only going to get tougher because, as we saw, people's demand for value for money is not going to dissipate in the near future. Communications will become more complex, but the need to express issues in simple, easy to understand ways will become more urgent as economic and time pressures continue to tighten. It will become more important to consult with the public on future directions for policy alternatives, not just in the traditional way, but in also more scientific ways. Public opinion surveys, for example. You know, the job will be tougher, but as Democrats working in the level of government closest to the people and the most trusted, you have to find this very exciting as well. This is a make or break time for municipal government, and the opportunities, I think, are highly attractive. I wish you all the very best as you move toward these challenges and move governance forward into the next century and beyond. Now, thanks very much. I think we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm prepared to answer almost any except when the federal election is called. I was sworn to secrecy as that.
Can I ask people to go to the microphone so that others can hear the question? Great, thank you.
Any aspect of public opinion?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm excited. This has been a very valuable session. I've been writing, and I think we should have asked in the first instance, is there any chance of getting a copy of those slides? For those of us who really are quite stunned by some of the results and would like to have them more permanently. Is that possible?
I'll talk to Pat Legree and see if we can get him something. I didn't bring any hard copies with me, so it may have to be sent down to you.
I appreciate it. That was my question. Thank you.
If people supply us with their business cards, we'll forward them out.
That's a good idea. If you were to pass on your business card, we'll make sure that you get a copy of it. Are you sure you're not doing marketing for money? No other questions? Paul.
On a series of the slides, there were blue, green, and red colored bars, and we were unable to market or tell what stood for what, except blue was business. Can you tell us what the red and green were? They're back at
Why don't
what slides?
I actually have a reverse button here. So why don't we move back here?
Yeah, that's fine. That's done.
Let's go to that one first. That's basically looking at which of the sections. Yes, indeed, we're missing a bit on the bottom of the code. Actually, it is there, but there's two heads in the way. Red is government, blue is business, and green is nonprofit. So that is generally the whole set of attitudes that are out there toward each of those. Which of those three sectors, for example, is the most competent? 11% for city government, 53% business, 26% nonprofit. Moving ahead, you see the business is the one area that seemed to attract such organizations as TB Ontario. We've got 44% there of the Ontario public saying that TB Ontario would be best managed by business, 24% by government, and 27%. Oh, sorry. There's a head right in front of that shadow. Red is business. Volunteer, nonprofit is blue, and green is government. So TB Ontario, business 44, 27 government is the green, and 24 nonprofit. You need a little bit wider screen there. Any questions with respect to anything here?
If I may, I have a question, not specifically to that overhead. I don't really have a good way of phrasing it. I'm reminded of Winston Churchill's definition of a good politician, or one of his definitions, I should say, and what I find out whether people want to call him, I'm like Al, get in front of them. But I'm curious as to the relationship between the pollster and the elected leadership of a nation or a province or a town. With respect to a corporation, I understand it's very important to know what people want, because otherwise you can't sell it to them. However, corporations have also been known to create a demand where it didn't exist before, under our order, under one example. What, in your view, should be, I understand you're making a living as a pollster, of course, and you're somewhat prejudiced, but should be the relationship between a leader, let's call it a national or provincial leader, and the polls that are provided to that leader. Should the leader be reacting to where people found a way to take people to where they should be going.
I can tell you watched CBC News Magazine last Friday night. That's a series of good questions. My view on the role of a pollster is to provide input, to basically act as an honest broker between the public and the elected representative. Not to manipulate the public in any way, but to bring the public to a table in the decision-making process. That has been done in a number of ways. Some of it may be considered slightly manipulative. For example, the deficit issue. We have 25% of Canadians who really know what the deficit is, and that's when they're given 5 options to choose from of a description of the deficit. 25% will choose the right one. That's only 5% higher than random. There was never any incredible pressure on, say, the federal government and provincial governments to move on the deficit from the public. That's, if you talk to Michael Wilson, he said publicly we couldn't do anything about the deficit because the public wasn't behind us on this issue. Now, if the provincial or federal government looked at this and said, well, gee, we know this is a problem, we're leading public opinion, but how are we going to bring the deficit into the mainstream? They could then look and look at the ways that the public could be educated to buy into the government policy on that. I think the CBC magazine on Friday night sort of pointed out that must be incredibly manipulative because the public wanted more emphasis, more government spending, more direct job creation. And the governments at all levels of government were saying, whoa, we're bankrupt, we can't afford this. Let's take a leadership role in this, and then let's look at how the public can buy into the politics. So I see that as probably the most extreme of the government by polling. But my view is if you take the needs, the fears, the concerns of ordinary people to government decision makers, you don't often get that exposure. I deal with banks, and I deal with bank chairmen under corporate disclosure that just can't believe why anybody would resent the money that they earn. And there's almost an ivory tower mentality, and I see it in Ottawa. I see it in the corporate center of a gap between where the public is and where these decision makers are. And it's in the private sector and the public sector, and it's important to narrow that gap. I view my job, which is doing the side, as well, we are the federal liberal polling agency, to try to keep the politicians' feet on the ground. Because you have 12 or 20 assistants, you live in Ottawa with everybody else who lives and works in Ottawa, and you start to lose track of where people really are. I think it's important to look at public opinion, to do polling, to do focus groups. We bring people in every single night to talk for hours about the issues that are facing, real concerns. Years ago, when I had more time, I used to rent a room from a welfare family to spend some time talking to people who might be a little intimidated coming down to our offices on Yorkville Avenue to talk in a boardroom about their concerns. You want to talk to them in their own words and language. Actually, that was one of the places that the federal Red Book came out of back in 1993, because people were saying, show me a politician that will make a promise and keep it, and I'll support them forever. And that's true at every level of government. We talked to 1,000 people about governments at every level, municipal, federal, provincial, and all of them had claimed, all 1,000 people, none of them could name one issue that one government had made in their election campaign and then fulfilled, which is why the advantage of the Red Book was the accountability document, but it was the real words of the public that translated into that type of what I think is leadership.
I had a question partially about, I know as a pollster you rank right up there near the top, people have confidence in that. And why is it that I never get asked for my public opinion on opinion polls? I never seem to get it on a focus group, but anyway, that one aside, You indicated that the public has changed its perception on confidence in the economy since last fall to now, about 2 million people or however many. What sort of things would have contributed to that change? Is it actual action? Is it the communication of policies? Is it the general economic factors, or sort of a combination of all those things that would have such a significant change in public opinion?
I'll deal with the first one, first question first. You should be asked questions by pollsters once every 32 years. We get a poll on this and we work out. If you do have any pressing opinions, please write them down and mail them to me. I'll be very happy to include them someplace. In terms of the attitude, which we have picked up, and we have about, in our quarterly reports, about 20 to 30 questions that really measure this impact. And we ask these right across the country as well as just in Ontario. And really, Ontario right now is the engine. The level of optimism is higher in this province than any other time. Usually it's been British Columbia which has been the most optimistic province. Ontario now leads that. And it's a bit of a sea change. In 1995, optimism was coming up after the recession. In 1995, in the spring, we get back to the deficit issue and the preparation to resolve the education that Canadians had to buy into. They bought into the fighting of the deficit. And as a result of that resolve, and they're still resolved, they want to get rid of it, although they're not fully conversant with why it's there or you know, how the actual international economy works. They still see it as a problem. So they want have wanted that removed. They're softening now, but that's for the reason that the deficit is getting a little better. And for the first time in 22 years that I've been polling, we now have a majority of people in the country think that the deficit will get better before it gets worse. Anyway, in 1995, when they bought into the recession, or bought into the deficit as an issue, the confidence went down, and it stayed down for a couple of years. They knew they would have to tighten their belts to get over this problem. Now they're starting to expect to see something as a result of the sacrifices they've made, and not just for that reason, but also perceptions of what's happening in the economy. There's more people now optimistic about their employment prospects, or at least societal employment prospects. General economic conditions, interest rates, inflation rates, all the things that we track in these surveys all are more positive, and they're more positive in Ontario than anywhere else. At the same time, that societal benefit hasn't been realized personally. They're still saying, well, I think unemployment is going to get better next year. Gee, I'm still worried. I'm still no less worried about my personal situation than I was last year, because it's still pretty horrendous when you have more than 4 in 10 believing that they or a member of their immediate family may lose their job over the next 12 months, which is what's there now. Only 8 people in 100 expect that they will actually make some real gains in standard of living and income. Over their income will more than keep pace with the cost of living, which is very low. So it still has a lot further to run in terms of moving towards real optimism. But 6 months ago, a year ago, the numbers were incredibly pessimistic right across the country. They're not looking too bad now.
Michael, Richard for Jellingtown, Ravenhurst. I was interested in the earlier part of your presentation. You made some comments on the fact about issues and the perception of issues. And I always had the feeling that at least my constituents had these issues that were just ripping their guts out, that were consuming them day and night. Yet you comment, and I think appropriately so, that there are a couple of fundamental issues that the rest of them, at least from a polling point of view, have to be prompted. Later you said that their perception of issues tends to be that which the press feeds them, or the media, I should say, feeds them. Could you comment on that balance, what are fundamental issues, and whatever the agenda of the media might be, why that then becomes, as I understood you to say, what the public thinks their issues are?
The public's issues, and again, I was trying to to point out that there's so many of the issues that municipal governments have to deal with are not clear-cut. They're not easily understood, they're not well publicized. As a result, a lot of the general public are not fully conversant with these, but you may not totally realize this because the people who are lined up to see you and making the appointments and the best of interests do understand those issues and have a point of view. If I can refer to another issue, the gun control issue, for example. Now we have a majority of people in the province, in all parts of the province, who are in favor of gun control. Women more than men, all sorts of various demographic differences like that. Obviously, the opposition to gun control increases in central Ontario and some of these more rural areas. But we still have, I've done surveys in people's writings that were absolutely convinced that because they only had one handwritten letter from women in favor of the legislation and 440 postcards, all pre-stamped, pre-rented, sort of off an assembly line, usually with NRA at the bottom, printed in the USA, that the public in their writing was against this issue. Whereas, obviously the vested interests or the interest groups that have something to say are far more vocal, which may give you the impression that that the issues are more important than they are occasionally, and that people are more well informed. And I can tell you that there's 5 people in every 100 in this country who do not know who the Prime Minister is. There's 8 people in every 100 in this province who don't know who the Premier of this province is. In Metro, 2 levels of government, we've done surveys on whether it's Metro Council or City Council, and I can tell you that there's maybe 2 in 100 who really understand what's going on. It's low familiarity, low understanding, and a lot of confusion every time November comes along.
Well, do I understand then, Michael, that you suggest that it's likely our job in government, rather than pollsters, to take the issues to the public and to make sure they're familiar with them? I think that's what I hear you saying.
Pollsters should never take issues to anybody, aside from whoever's paying them. But and they don't give quiet advice all backed up by certain data. No, I think you have a great opportunity to do that because you're now being given more high-profile issues, well-publicized. They're galvanizing for the public, and I think that it will be easier for you to discuss those issues now, and also to make points, with the public in terms of what the meaning of those issues is, to educate them. Just because of the importance of his being awarded, to these issues and how the people will react to them. Then you lack the 35% usual voter turnout that we see, which is pretty abysmal. Can be improved. That when we can get 98% voter turnout for the Quebec referendum, it should be possible, at least I think, in Ontario to reach upwards of 50% in municipal.
I don't mean to hop the line, but can I ask another question?
Well, since we're running early, we may as well.
Have you done any polling on the public's perceptions towards restructuring the government, either in the city of Toronto or broader across the province, Kingston or other areas? So municipal restructuring of government. Have you done any polling on that?
Specifically, I think we have some in our Perspectives Ontario report, but I can't. I didn't bring material. But we have found a lot of room in terms of these issues. They're not mature issues. A mature issue is something like gun control or something like abortion. If you have a value opinion on those issues, you're not going to move all that much. When it comes to questions of restructuring, it's the arguments that are provided that are so effective. We saw that with during the whole megacity referendum. The movement in the early part of it, for and against, different issues, different motivations. And there's a lot of room, if you argue these issues, because they are mature issues, they can be swayed from one side to the other. So it's important really to test the hot buttons of those arguments to find out what is it, what will lever people from looking at something one way to looking at it slightly different. Just like any lawyer would test arguments for a court case.
Related to that, have you done any polling on the present activity in the legislature in Ontario?
Nobody so far has actually shown any interest in what they're doing.
In the legislature or in the activity?
Well, certainly not even the newspaper, to come up with $700 for one question across the province. I would, we've polled on those issues before. Again, we'll find maybe 33% of the public, I'm guessing based on past things, the Elvin Curlings and all sorts of things in the past 20 years, actually, all the way back to late Sandals, maybe 30 to 33% are paying attention to that. And what their position is, I'm not sure at this point. We wouldn't know. I'm too busy trying to figure out whether we should call an election.
Michael, in your comments, you were referring to the opportunities in terms of municipalities with some of the transfer of functions between the province and municipalities. Could you comment on what you anticipate the expectations of how the expectations of the public are going to change towards municipal politicians in that new environment?
Oh,
Could you repeat that for the audience, please?
gee, I'm going to be lucky to find an answer.
We don't want them to know.
I thought that was what my speech started, actually. No, it's sorry, could you sort of brace it?
Oh, just the
Use the mic.
yeah.
You can have mine.
The changing expectations of the public as a result of the transition in terms of service delivery from province to municipalities, and what the implications of that might be for the local politicians.
Yeah, that was what I was talking about all morning. The implications, I think, on the change of service delivery will be first, the more attention issue. The expectations, I think, will not be incredibly high at the municipal level, because municipal level, while it's trusted, while it seems to be the organization closest to the public, is not well understood. I would expect to see a lot of change over the first year or so, between maybe low expectations rising as time gets on. Again, it will need a lot of education, a lot of explanation on what issues are going to handle by which government, and how they're being parceled out among the sectors, and that type of thing. It's something that will, I think, take a while to unravel and be clear on what actually happens. Pollsters really aren't good at predicting the future. JoJo's Psychic Alliance is a little better. We don't predict what happens a year from now, but what's happening today and why, and what could happen tomorrow as a result of it.
What percentage of your polling is done in phone interview?
75% telephone, 25% focus groups. We do not use mail surveys. Mail surveys we have never recommended, because, and if you've used them, and many municipalities do, because they are less expensive, but they're also, they're actually more expensive in the long run, because you get such a weak response. If you get 5 people responding in every 100 ballots that you send out, those are the people who are either very, very impressed with what you're doing, or very, very annoyed. And it's a self-selection process. It's like on the gun control issue. The people who feel strong are the ones who are against it. So the key is to make sure everybody's attitude, which is why with telephone we can do about, for every 100 ballot numbers that we attempt to contact, we get about 70 interviews completed. And as a result, you can base advertising rates on data as accurate as that. You can, you can take what you can trust. If we call you, and we normally call you when you're having dinner, 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. During the weeknight, you're not at home. We don't just throw the number away and try somebody else, because you may be different. You may be a workaholic, you may be a shift worker, you're Democrat, you may be an alcoholic. The demographics of what you do may be impacting on the fact that you're not home when we try to contact you. So we'll try you on a Saturday, we'll try you until we get hold of you. While trying not, of course, to wake you up or be more obtrusive than we usually have to. And by interviewing as strong a model, when we build a geodemographic model of the entire country or the entire municipality or wherever we're polling into, we try to figure out who to talk to. And we talk to exactly the right people. And we talk to enough of them. It's like the old issue of 500 white marbles, 500 black marbles. It's statistically accurate that if you mix them all up, you pull out, if you had 15 million white marbles, 15 million black marbles, pull out 1,000, you'd have between 53% black and 47% black. You know that because these statistical tolerances are certain. But if you just talk to those on the fringe, the people who aren't happy, if you're doing a service delivery survey or satisfaction survey in a municipality, or send out a mail ballot, you will get some very strange results. We work for a lot of utilities, electrical utilities, gas, you name it. A lot of our work is customer satisfaction. And you have to try to get the people who may not be motivated to respond.
Thank you. I'm a councilman in the town of Huntsville. I find that in the course of dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, most people really don't care unless you're digging up their street in front of their house. In the course of polling, how can you comment generally or specifically on the number of people that you contact who really just don't care or only give an answer because you're on the phone?
We find Canadians are a very caring group of people. We'll get some questions where we'll have 30%, 40% no opinion. We ask people about the Pearson Airport deal, for example. We'll get 55% of people will tell us first they haven't heard anything about it. And of the people who have, another 50% of those people will tell us that they couldn't give a damn. What the issues are, and they don't have a position on it. They don't know who's performed well or badly or any of that type of thing. We get into other issues. Even issues that you might not think would be incredibly important. I'm trying to think of one. Should we have garbage collection twice a week rather than once a week? You have 96% who have an opinion on it. But the key is to always ask the question, how strongly do you feel on this issue? If you look at gun control, for example, everybody's got an opinion on it, or most people. And it's not just important to know whether people are either in favor or against it, but after you've asked them, how concerned really are you about the issue, and how strongly do you hold the view that you do? And we'll get usually all but a few percent with an opinion.
Excuse me, question that might.
I guess I have to stand up.
I'm saying on a phone book
I've
myself.
always been under the impression that, I've always been under the impression that these things, you can make them say whatever you want them to say, depending on who's paying your freight on it. I happen to be 51 years old and I've never been asked. And I have a colleague who is 67 years old and has never been asked either. We had a presentation one night at council where it showed that politicians were at the very, very bottom, right underneath lawyers. So I'm looking at this now going, well, this doesn't say anything like what that other one said. So can you not make them say what you want them to say depending on who's paying your freight?
No, absolutely not. We have an organization called CAMRO, Community Association of Market Research Organizations, which audits all of the member companies, and good firms like Amberonics, Decimus, Puget Council Group, Compass, are all audited to make sure that they collect the data that they say they're collecting, that they collect it in the proper way, and don't screw it up. Actually, I think all the firms are members of this organization. Deloitte Touche comes in, they audit us, they take us apart, sample selection, questionnaire design. All but there's one firm I think is not a member, that's Angus Reid. I'll be commenting on that.
So how do you explain the discrepancy between one public trust index result and that public trust index result?
We've been tracking this for a long time. Actually, the lawyers, I have never seen come up as high as they have in terms of any of our surveys. You will get, depending on the question that is asked. This question is, let's read your list of following professions. You tend to trust these people a lot, trust them a little, distrust them a little, or distrust them a lot. Now, other ways that we could ask it might be on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all trustworthy and 10 is very trustworthy. Where would you place each of these professions? And that's slightly different, because 1 is where you think they really should be, their place in the world, and the other one is, do you trust them? And in this case, I was really concerned when I saw the pollsters going slightly ahead of lawyers. But I think you can have a lot of solace when the municipal government is right up there with the altruistic profession, the doctors, the school teachers, the police officers. People who are doing a lot of good. Go down, and there's the Ontario government after a bit of a jump, and then a further jump, and my federal government clients would like to be pointing this out all the time, but it's amazing how low they are, though there is still a majority of people trusting the federal government. Half of people trusting the people who run unions. Car dealers are at the bottom. Actually, we have arms dealers, which normally is in the bottom, but actually this is the first year that arms dealers has actually been a little bit ahead of car dealers. I've actually got into a lot of arguments with car dealers over this.
Well, maybe they should have the other trust index because they're probably a lot higher. But I see a big difference between police officers, school teachers, and so on. Those 4, there's a big jump down.
And they're altruistic. They're doing their work because they're honest, good people. They're not self-interested. And these are national numbers. We have seen that in certain provinces, depending on the issue, nurses, for example, in Alberta, I believe they weren't as high as the rest of the country. Doctors, lower in Ontario, lower in Alberta because of the difficulties there. School teachers, if there's a strike perhaps, depending on who is seen to be the winner and loser, may go up and down. It's difficult to tell at this stage. But the rest have a more transactional relationship. Either we're looking for your money as people who run large companies, or we're looking for your vote. And I guess the real transactions are the car dealers. Interestingly, we looked at that by demographic, and women tend to be more trusting of all of these professions than men. And I was sure when I came into car dealers that I would not find that, having worked for some auto associations in the past. And we did not find that at all. There was actually more women trusting car dealers than men trusting car dealers. So every time we do a survey, we're surprised at something. If we can predict public opinion, we could save a lot of money and not have to actually spend so much money collecting. How long distance goes for everything?
Last question.
Yes, could you comment on the recent mega-city campaign that was undertaken as to the degree to which the vote was influenced and the degree to which the final result really reflects the view that you would get from the population of the polls?
We did not work for any of the sides on the mega-city issue. I did do for the Toronto Star, an editorial on the problems inherent. They actually paid me for it too, it was amazing. But the problems inherent in the entire process. And the process, to look at it as a referendum, I don't think is valid. To look at it as a demonstration, I think is more valid. As a effective measure of public opinion, I don't think it was there. The turnout was too low, there was too much baggage, too many value-laden things on each side. The ballot question was value-laden. I forget exactly what it was because I never received a ballot, even though I live in York, never received one. And there were quite a few problems with the way that the methodology, the tying of one side into one position on the campaign. I wasn't a great lover of the Charlottetown Accord either, the way that one was handled. But some of the same emotions were coming out in the megacity referendum, as it was called, as in the Charlottetown Town Accord. Actually, though, I think the referendums I've done in here and in other countries, I think I've lost 3 of the last 5 anyway, so I'm not your best choice, including independence from crown colony status for Bermuda a little while ago. Also a good tax write-off.
Just one last question.
Michael, I was wondering if you've done any extensive polling of racial communities, those communities whose primary language is not English, and if so, have you noticed any huge variation in the results that you presented today?
These questions, we didn't look at that by ethnicity, or what we call it. We have a question on ancestry that actually builds up very good numbers. But the whole thing in surveying is to get a good enough sample size. So if we're doing 1,000 people, and to look at, say, the Italo-Canadian or Portuguese Canadian communities, we would need a good size sample of about 300. To give accuracy of 300 to 5.8%. And often we don't get that, unless we do separate surveys. We've done surveys, I think 12 or 14 communities, all told, everything from a Ukrainian study to Italian study, which has been written up in a book. We have done a Chinese financial study, which I can tell you is incredibly difficult because there are various cultural differences that we find in doing asking questions. And there are some people who don't like answering certain questions, such as income, for example. Usually when we ask people's income, get a 96% of people we ask telling us what they earn. Religion, we only have about a 4 or 5% refusal rate. Sexual preference, we have about a 15% refusal rate. But we actually get 85% of people, telling us the truth about, whether they're heterosexual or otherwise. But when it comes to, say, the Chinese community, I think we had a 35% refusal rate on income. So there are some sensitivities that we have to be careful of. We do get very, great differences in terms of participation, spending, priorities for living. But there'll be the topic of another hour and a half. I think people are probably ready for coffee break.
Michael, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for the presentation. The information that was conveyed, everyone was fascinated by, and I'm sure we're going to receive a lot of requests for copies of the slides. So thank you for providing that.
The introduction portion of the following plenary session was inadvertently cut off. The following session is a presentation on the Who Does What Reforms package. Our speakers today are Dana Richardson, Assistant Deputy Minister, Municipal Policy Division, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Terry Mundell, President of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and co-chair of the Social and Community Health Services and Provincial Municipal Who Does What Transition Teams. We also have Jack Carroll, Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Community and Social Services, also co-chair of the Social and Community Health Services Who Does What Transition Team. Unfortunately, Mr. Carroll could not attend due to the voting in the legislature on Bill 103. In his place is Ron Chong, Political Advisor to Janet Eckert, Minister of Community and Social Services. We now join Ron shortly after the start of his opening remarks.
Where it makes sense for the province to assume total responsibility for financing and providing services to citizens, we will continue to play this role. Where, on the other hand, it makes more sense for municipalities with their frontline expertise to take the lead, then they will have the responsibility to do so. And finally, where it makes sense for the province and municipalities to share in the funding and provision of services, that will be our approach. Our plans move us beyond the artificial boundaries of governments and focus on providing taxpayers with what they deserve and expect: better services at lower costs. The government continues to be open to suggestions from our municipal partners towards improving the who does what measures. Indeed, we have already held discussions with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario on its first proposal, and we anticipate receiving another proposal, which was expected for tomorrow, but we expect sometime in the near future. However, we are committed to moving ahead with the implementation. From now on, the people of Ontario will benefit from smaller, simpler, more accountable, and less costly government. For instance, a quality education system today is critical to the future success of Ontario. Education is vital to Ontario's economy and quality of life. Most people agree that education spending must be well managed and invested wisely, and that the people who spend those dollars must be accountable. Taxpayers don't want to see their tax dollars spent on needless waste and over-administration. Yet education costs in Ontario have been allowed to get out of control. Over the last 10 years, for example, and you heard this earlier from Dan Burns, the total student enrollment has increased by only 16%, inflation has increased by about 40%, school board spending has increased by 82%, and property taxes have gone up by more than 120%. That's a huge burden, and one that residential property taxpayers should not have to bear. That's why this government is removing that burden. By taking education off the backs of residential property taxpayers, by funding it as a provincial priority, we can focus resources where they belong, on the individual student and teacher in the classroom. To do this effectively, school board administration would be cut. And with this move, we're improving the financial strength of municipalities. We will replace the revenue from residential taxpayers with provincial grants under a new fair funding model. This will recognize the costs of educating students and of meeting their special needs. Businesses will continue with their contribution to the costs of education, and revenues raised locally will be spent in the community. And we will control costs while enhancing student performance and cutting bureaucratic duplication and waste. Significant changes will take place in the area of property tax assessments. In many Ontario municipalities, assessment is based on property values that are way out of date. So we're proposing to change the system. The new system will be fair. It will help taxpayers to understand how their local taxes are set and how they compare to other taxes on similar properties. Values would be based on the sale value of properties. Those with similar properties will pay similar taxes. Other important aspects of the proposed new legislation include a simpler assessment appeal process, the elimination of the unfair and discriminatory business occupancy tax, and tax cuts on eligible farmland, managed forests, and conservation lands. Another very important part of our plans to reduce the size and cost of government and to improve services relates to social, community health, and social housing programs. In this area, the province will continue to establish the legislative framework and set the standards and regulations by which municipalities will deliver services under this new system. The changes necessary to create this new plan for social and community health services in Ontario will involve several ministries. Let me address each in turn. Ontario is the only province to retain a province-wide two-tier welfare system. Short-term assistance is delivered by the municipalities, and long-term assistance is delivered by the province. Despite this costly anomaly, this government's welfare reforms have produced an unprecedented decline in the number of people collecting welfare in Ontario. In addition, a key initiative of the reforms, Ontario Works, will go further by not only reducing welfare caseloads, but even more importantly, by giving welfare recipients the tools they need and want to become more productive members of the community. Ontario Works recognizes that if people are going to get the chance to make the transition from welfare to work, it is crucial that we shift our welfare system from being a passive one to an active one. The old welfare system offered passive assistance. People filled out the right forms, received their government checks, and were left on their own to search for work. Employment services were administered separately, unrelated to an individual's needs, and for the most part, were ineffective in moving recipients into full-time work. In contrast, Ontario Works is a balanced and innovative program designed to help participants find a job. Ontario Works provides active assistance. People receive supports to help them get off the welfare treadmill. They get the chance to refresh old skills, establish new ones, build a strong resume, and make contacts with potential employers. It is designed as a vehicle to help people cross the path from social assistance to self-sufficiency, to find the shortest route to paid employment. There are three elements to Ontario Works. Very briefly, the first element is community participation, under which recipients work on community projects that best combine their skills, experience, and needs. The second is employment supports, which offers recipients support in conducting job search, as well as basic education and job-specific skills training if necessary. The third element is employment placement, which brings together people with employers through referrals to job placement agencies. Excuse me. The private sector is encouraged to hire people who have participated in Ontario Works. However, the private sector is not permitted to administer Ontario Works projects. No placements in community projects are permitted to displace workers from paid positions. Ontario Works is not a source of free, cheap labor. That would defeat the purpose. Programs are delivered by municipalities because they are sensitive to local needs. This is not a make-work project, it is a make-opportunity project. Ontario Works has been in operation since September, and we are already seeing signs of success. We have now received business plans from the majority of municipalities across the province. 20 have had their plans approved and are now moving ahead with their Ontario Works programs. Across the province, more than 16,000 people have already actively participated in one or more of the three components of Ontario Works that I have just described to you. Ontario Works will be completely up and running across the province by 1998. We will then have a welfare system that is both accountable to taxpayers and actively working to return participants to the workforce. Meanwhile, an economic recovery is well underway in Ontario. Jobs are being created. More will be created in the years to come. These jobs will go to those who have the education, skills, and experience to take advantage of new opportunities. Ontario Works is designed to help provide them. The change in welfare rates to 10% above the average of the 900 provinces, the continuing crackdown on fraud and abuse, and the implementation of Ontario Works are creating significant cost savings. As an aside, I am pleased to report that our policy changes and fraud control measures have already realized savings of $1.3 billion since we were elected. The province wants to share these savings with municipalities. In order to create an integrated and streamlined social assistance system, the province will transfer responsibility for income and employment support services for sole support parents to the municipal level, and will cost-share welfare programs on a 50-50 basis with municipalities. Furthermore, earlier this year, we announced our willingness to make a provincial contribution of a $700 million fund to establish a municipal social assistance reserve. We feel that this reserve is a prudent move to guard against unforeseen local circumstances and just one good concrete example of good management. As people in this room well know, a vital program that supports people in their efforts to find employment is childcare. The current childcare system in Ontario is complex and cumbersome, with both the province and the municipalities involved in funding, inspection, and licensing. It stands to reason that all aspects of this important program should be managed by one level of government. Municipalities already have the ability to manage, deliver, and license childcare. In future, childcare will be mandatory, managed at the municipal level and cost shared on a 50-50 basis with municipalities. The province will continue to provide comprehensive quality and safety standards with input, obviously, from the municipalities. Another important social policy area is housing. Ontario participates extensively in a variety of housing programs which are financed jointly by all three levels of government. These programs are currently operated by both the province and municipalities. Clearly, municipalities are in the best position to determine the social housing needs in their communities. Responsibility for the funding and management of social housing will therefore be transferred to the municipal level. Another area that we are addressing is the current financing arrangements for community health services, which are inconsistent and unnecessarily complex. In future, municipalities will assume full funding for public health programs. The province will set and enforce standards and retain responsibility for programs with a province-wide reach, such as disease control and immunization. The province remains committed to maintaining healthcare spending at $17.4 billion. Building on reforms that have already been made in long-term care, the next step in the plan is the creation of a new provincial long-term care agency that will coordinate the system within province-wide standards. Municipalities will assume 50% of the funding for these services. The government believes it has a critical role to play in addressing violence against women. We will therefore assume responsibility for 100% of the costs of supporting women's shelters. The changes required to implement this plan for an integrated social and community health services system are substantial and far-reaching. We know they will take time to put in place, and the majority of these changes will not be implemented until after 1998. They will require careful and coordinated planning to ensure a smooth transition, consultation with key stakeholders, and sensitive recognition of human resource implications. People will continue to have their needs met by existing programs and services until we are confident the new system can fully support them. As I said before, our municipal partners have a great deal of expertise in the delivery of services to people. We will work closely with them to determine how and when to make these changes. Consultation strategies involving municipalities and other stakeholders are under development. As part of its commitment to implementing the Who Does What reforms, the province has established a transition team of municipal representatives co-chaired by both levels of government. Their role is to advise during the transition period on the best possible way to work together in carrying out the wide range of proposed Who Does What reforms. You will recall that there are two transition teams that were established on February the 21st. The Social and Community Health Services Transition Team, co-chaired by Terry Mundell and Jack Carroll, Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Community and Social Services, and the Provincial Municipal Transition Team, co-chaired by Terry Mundell and Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Both transition teams will operate through 1997 and beyond. The government has identified critical areas for the transition team to examine the upcoming weeks in order to pave the way for implementation. The transition teams will be working on items like assessment, delivery, allocation of transition and restructuring funds, cost sharing, service boundaries and governance, integrated models of delivery, standards and accountability mechanisms, implementation plan framework, advice, and communications. We are looking forward to their advice and recommendations. Other elements of our plan involve having the province step aside so that the municipalities get their own priorities. For example, it isn't fair that 576 municipalities do not directly pay for police services, but their neighbors do. When everyone pays the cost of their local police services through municipal property taxes, that inequity stops. Taxpayers pay for services that make sense for their own communities. Under the new approach, municipalities will be able to consider integration of their fire, police, and ambulance services so that, in an emergency, people get the help they need in the most effective and efficient way possible. The province will refocus its role in the area of water and sewer services to set and enforce high-performance standards and ensure that water quality continues to be safeguarded. Municipalities will be responsible for local service, and they will have the flexibility to choose an operator that best serves local needs, providing quality services at the best price. Municipalities will also have the responsibility to manage and fund libraries in their communities. Overall, we think both the province and the municipalities will be able to save money through this realignment of responsibility. We're removing education and its rising costs from the residential property taxpayer and asking municipalities to assume the responsibility for social assistance, which is a declining extent. In addition to assisting municipalities setting up a one-time $800 million capital and operating restructuring fund, which will be available for the next 4 years. The fund will be for investment in upgrades to infrastructure that municipalities assume from the province. The operating fund is for one time, so municipalities can prepare for new service responsibilities and move to more efficient methods of service delivery or local government restructuring. We are also setting up a permanent $1 billion community reinvestment fund to ensure that special community needs are met. To make sure that the changes are manageable, we will be implementing them over several years. Our plan will work and lead to better, less costly services. The reforms included in the government's plan will deliver tangible and positive changes to Ontario. The ultimate result will be less bureaucracy, lower costs to the taxpayers, and higher quality services for the people of Ontario. It's a good deal for taxpayers, it's a good deal for the province, and it's a good deal for municipalities. On behalf of Mr. Carroll, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I'd now like to welcome Terry Mundo, President of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. As we mentioned several times, Terry chaired the WBW transition teams. Terry has been advocating the municipal sector's interests and needs since his election to a board of directors in 1990. Prior to his election as president, he served the association in various capacities. Among them, member of the Association Municipalities in Future Task Force, chair of its task force on planning reform from 92 to 95, and chair of the Environment Policy Committee from 92 to 1994. Terry was first elected to municipal government in 1980 as councillor for the Village of Erin. Since 1988, Terry has been the village's reed and councillor for the County of Wellington. When Terry is not advocating the broader municipal sector's interests and needs in dealing with day-to-day issues of the village and county, he works with the family business, a fourth-generation family lumber and hardware business established in 1896. Ladies and gentlemen, Terry Mundo.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here today to speak to you on behalf of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and to speak to you a little bit about some of the announcements which our sector has been reeling from since January, in specific the Mega Week announcements, the Who Does What announcements. I can say it's also nice to see some familiar faces, some people which I haven't had an opportunity to speak to for a while. In particular, a past clerk administrator of the Village of Erin, Janine Kilburn. Nice to see you again. And of course, a past clerk administrator of the Township of Erin, our good neighbors who have since moved up to Bracebridge, Murray Clark. Murray, nice to see you again. I can tell the two of you as well that this is probably like old hat for you, where you see me get up in front of a crowd, I kind of mouth off, get myself in trouble, and then staff is to come up and bail me out again, so I hope you haven't lost that touch yet. January's Mega Week announcements set out an agenda for change that is literally mind-boggling. The government's plans for reform of provincial and municipal roles and responsibilities is comprehensive, ambitious, and admittedly somewhat daunting. I'm sure that we all share some optimism and some concern about the implications of such vast change. All of us are also well aware that change isn't beginning with the Who Does What announcements. We've been in a constant state of change since this government was elected in 1995. Yet keeping up with the pace of change has been extremely challenging for our sector. I think it's fair to say that change is inherently positive. A static environment does little to promote innovation and little to challenge the assumptions on which patterns of inertia are built. Times are changing, and municipalities are anxious to capitalize on change and to take the lead whenever possible, to ensure that municipal governments and property taxpayers benefit from a brighter future. It's also fair to say that much of the change we are seeing arises from our own hard work. Our own hard work to promote change and reform over the years. And I won't pretend that the Who Does What package of reforms is supportable or a step in the right direction. In fact, I believe quite the opposite is true. But I will say that there are many, many positive aspects of the Who Does What proposals that are welcomed by Ontario municipalities. We're certainly anxious to get on with the good, but we want to first take a second look at the bad. I have to admit that some of the changes took the municipal sector by surprise. Who would have predicted that any government would ask municipalities to buy into an open-ended commitment on welfare spending, long-term health care, and financial support for people with disabilities? We've always said that education should not be funded with property taxes, but we've also said loud and clear that a higher share of welfare costs is too high a price to pay for education finance reform. I don't mind telling you that it's not just AMO that's concerned. Municipalities of every kind across this province, in every part of this province, agree this is a bad idea. And we're in good company. Advice from David Crombie has said that it's fundamentally wrong and will have disastrous impacts at the local level. The business and financial community agree that it's bad for business and bad for our communities. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious problem on our hands. We're prepared, however, to work hard to find a solution. And in order to do this, we've agreed to work with the government and all other stakeholders to find a solution that meets the needs of the province, municipalities, and property taxpayers. But you didn't invite me here today to talk about problems. You invited me to talk about change. And as I said, there are a lot of positive changes to discuss. Most change these days is driven by fiscal imperatives. Municipalities understand the province's fiscal agenda because we know what it means to balance a high level of demand for quality services with scarce public resources. We know what it means to raise taxes. And quite frankly, we don't like doing it any more than anybody else. And we also know what it means to have a balanced operating budget. We know what it looks like. And we understand that balancing budgets requires difficult and sometimes painful decisions. That the Mega Week announcements left municipalities $1 billion in the hole did not come as a surprise to any of us. After all, we took a $700 million hit in 1995. And we responded to that reduction by saying, let us operate our governments with less provincial intervention, less red tape, less regulation, allowing us to find the opportunities for innovation, efficiencies, and we can probably manage with less. Bill 26, and soon the new Municipal Act will allow us to get on with the business of local government with less provincial regulation and less red tape. It's a welcome change, and it's long overdue. But as I said, no one was surprised that we lost another $1 billion in January. I think what surprised people most was the government's refusal to acknowledge that it was taking $1 billion out of our sector. While many municipalities have planned for the eventual elimination of municipal support grants, they did not expect funding reductions to coincide with substantial new service and funding responsibilities. I'm sure every municipal representative here today shared a similar reaction to Finance Minister's promise of a 10% property tax decrease. It's something that AMO has said would be very difficult to achieve given the Mega Week transfers. Change. It's here. It's now. We are certainly in the middle of a radical change to provincial municipal roles and responsibilities, but there is much that we can do to make sure it works. I'm often struck by the similarities of the response to change that comes from municipalities all across this province. In most cases, we share common concerns, same ideas about the implications of new directions in public policy. When AMO attended the police summit, and quite frankly, the memory of this hotel I have is the police summit because this is where it took place. And in fact, when we came in as a sector and talked to all the different associations that represented the police officers, the police chiefs, the police services boards, the municipal governments were the only one that didn't happen to pack a gun, and it was somewhat daunting for us, I can tell you. The summit, which was hosted by Minister Runciman last year, there was unanimous support for improvements to local governance and local accountability for police services. Many people thought that the municipal sector would be divided on the idea or the issue of redistributing OPP costs in rural communities. Simply wasn't the case. Simply wasn't true. Municipalities were united behind the principles of governance and accountabilities for local services. In the face of considerable opposition from other stakeholders, the Minister has introduced changes to the Police Services Act that will ensure that police services in Ontario are managed and financed within a system that is truly accountable to taxpayers. Policing is an excellent example of a critical public system, service system, where provincial interests and province-wide standards are reflected in local decision-making and local management responsibility. Local control over costs completes the picture of a service system that meets the needs of the people who rely on those services, the men and women who deliver them, and the governments that account for them. There are similar improvements for fire protection and fire prevention, allowing elected municipal governments to better integrate services and to exercise a fair measure of management control over municipal services like fire services is fundamental to accountable and efficient service delivery. Bill 86, the Better Local Government Act, and a new Municipal Act in 1997 are also extremely positive developments for municipal governments and for property taxpayers. I also want to highlight today some of the mega-week changes that do make some sense to the sector. Assessment reform is long overdue in the province of Ontario, and it's no more apparent than it is here in the Ministry's Central Region. Quality up-to-date assessment information is the foundation of municipal finances. Fixing a system that is broken will benefit municipalities and help councils to plan for stable revenues to match stable and appropriate local expenditures. But in some communities, the impact of assessment reform will be substantial. In others, assessed property values are relatively current already. The province-wide reassessment that is currently underway will be the foundation for all provincial municipal reform scheduled for 1998. Its success is critical, and the Ministry of Finance bears a tremendous responsibility in that respect. The decision to shift responsibility for assessment services to the municipal sector also makes sense. From a policy perspective, assessment delivery is a priority municipal service. Yes, municipalities are concerned about the timing of the transfer of the assessment service responsibilities. It looks to us like the January 1998 transfer is in the middle of the process of change for a new assessment system and a brand new tax policy framework. Like the Who Does What panel, AMO believes that the transfer of costs and responsibilities for assessment services should occur after the new and untested assessment framework is stabilized. When responsibility for assessment services is transferred to the municipal sector, we'll need a model of delivery that balances the government's objectives of uniform province-wide system with the municipal objectives of quality, efficiency, flexibility, and full cost recovery. Other parts of the Who Does What also support real disentanglement, including changes in sewer and water services, libraries, transit, and roads. We still have a lot of work to do to ensure that these reforms can work, but the approach is sensible and municipalities are ready to move ahead to ensure that it happens. Changes to the Provincial Offences Act also make a lot of sense. Delivers on the principle that the body doing the work has access to the related revenue. Seems fair and reasonable. There are some other areas that we need to look at in terms of alternate revenues for municipal governments. An excellent example is the fuel tax. Obviously, the fuel tax revenue should be distributed along with the responsibility for roads maintenance and construction. I don't think any reasonable person would dispute that. One of the Who Does What proposals that is causing a lot of concern in rural communities is the elimination of the province's $170 million farm tax rebate program. As you know, the program is to be replaced with a 75% municipally funded discount for farm taxes. The revenue implications for rural communities is enormous, and the move will most likely lead to tax hikes for residential property taxpayers and ultimately for farmers as well. I can tell you in some of the communities in Wellington County that bill's over $1 million in the community, and the amount of tax increase is substantial, some of them up as high as 50%. In addition to the tax room that education finance reform is intended to provide, the proposed $1 billion community reinvestment fund will assist communities to cope with increased costs and less revenue. But if the overall swap was the wash the government suggests it is, the equation might be manageable. Unfortunately, that's not the case. What's more, we're faced with the prospect of a new and tenuous provincial grant program that flies in the face of financial self-reliance for municipal governments. There are those who believe that financial self-reliance is not attainable for all Ontario's communities. And in some cases, they may be right. But it's difficult to know at this point what position any of us will be in 1998 with a new assessment base, new tax policy, and dramatically different financial responsibilities. I have not yet seen any financial impact analysis of local impacts. I'm not sure they exist. But on the topic of financial self-reliance, I can tell you that it's the goal of municipalities in every part of Ontario. In Northern Ontario, for example, we're still waiting for assessment reform that will allow municipalities to recover the costs of services to currently unorganized communities. How mining facilities and pipelines are taxed is yet to be resolved. There are structural improvements that we can make to improve the financial situation of northern communities outside of the old grant model. In growing communities, permissive development charges legislations can mean the difference between stable taxes and tax increases. We all need to realize that the whole range of municipal revenue and the whole range of municipal financial responsibilities is a system that needs to sustain a balance. Changing important components of that system without regard to the bigger picture is a recipe for disaster. Municipalities want stable revenues that match stable responsibilities and expenditures that we can plan for. We want sustainable solutions for provincial municipal reform that eliminate the need for ongoing and tenuous provincial financial support. We simply do not want to return to the tired scenario of municipalities going cap in hand to the province. Some people believe that restructuring is the answer to the financial squeeze this government is precipitating in our sector. We continue to face serious impediments to restructuring, such as outdated labor legislation. But even without those impediments, we all know that restructuring is not a panacea. It's not a magic pill that will cure decades of overly complex and entangled provincial municipal financial arrangements. Municipal structures and boundaries will adjust to match new realities. Form follows function. But restructuring needs to be about more than redrawing municipal boundaries. It needs to be about changing expectations. It needs to be about engaging property taxpayers in discussions about the services they want and need, about the services they're prepared to pay for. It needs to be about new ways of doing business, where innovation, efficiency, and competition are rewarded. People in our communities want public services that are flexible and responsive to changing needs. They want local innovations and models of service delivery that match the circumstances and priorities of their communities. They want to see investment in local services that promotes long-term cost effectiveness. They want to benefit from economies of scale. They demand that all levels of government work together to use their tax dollars effectively. Much must be accomplished in 1997 if municipal governments and the province are going to prepare for major reform in 1998. And there are better ways for us to get there. Ways that rationalize and disentangle services and property taxpayers and protect property taxpayers from potential tax increases. That's why AMO's at the table. That's why we're working hard to make the transition process work. I'm confident that we can make it happen. I think we can learn a lot from listening to each other, but now more than ever, we need to work together to build a solid future for Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Our final speaker is Dana Richardson. Dana is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Municipal Policy Development Division of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. She is responsible for the development of policy and legislation affecting municipal governance, financing, and planning. Dana joined the Ontario Public Service in 1983 as a residential tenancy commissioner, and since has held policy positions in housing and municipal affairs. Prior to joining the public service, she practiced law in Toronto for several years. She also has a master's in public administration from Queen's University. Ladies and gentlemen, Dana Richardson.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about
some of the things that the provincial municipal transition team will be involved in over probably the next 2 years. And Jack's speech that Ron delivered concentrated more on some of the social and community health things. Terry has the benefit of having to deal with both of these issues, or the burden, one or the other. And I'll try to concentrate my comments in one area. As we previously discussed, the purpose of the Who Does What reforms is to, over time, and we recognize this doesn't happen immediately, but over time, to produce smaller, simpler, less costly governments. And that means both provincially and municipally. And in order to do that, there still are a lot of things to be done, a lot of transition to be planned, a lot of implementation to be worked through. And that's why 1997 is a year that we have specifically planned to use for that implementation, planning, and transition. I'm going to be dealing with a number of the positives on Terry's list, so that puts me in a better position at the moment. But nevertheless, it is a package, and we have to think about how all the pieces work together towards 1998. 1998, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the pieces will be implemented exactly on January 1st. That's why we're taking this year to look at what makes sense, what needs to be done first, what can be phased in over a period of time. And very much we want to take the approach of let's make it manageable, let's make it workable. Let's take the pieces and work them through. And that's the part that I've been most involved with, and I'm working with supporting the provincial and municipal transition team and the Who Does What package. Since the announcements in January, there have been a lot of things that have gone on. We have, I'm going to touch on these, the legislation, the work of the transition teams, ongoing individual consultations on specific items and specific implementations with municipalities, number of complementary activities on the restructuring front, and then I'm going to touch on some of the next steps of what's up. As Dan Burns referred to earlier today, we have 10 pieces of legislation underway related to Who Does What. And the first one, the Better Local Government Act, has actually been passed. So we are now operating under those new set of rules and provisions for this year's municipal elections. That act also made some changes for debt and investment, and some changes that should help municipalities manage their insurance and liability costs. The Fire Services Act is underway. We're in the hearing stage for all the other 9 pieces of legislation. Development charges is underway. The minister has already announced that we will be making some amendments to the Development Charges Act as it was proposed. And those particularly deal with the 10% municipal contribution for such things as water and sewer and roads. And the amendments being proposed would be to eliminate that 10% contribution for a specific set of services. We are still open for considering further amendments. The hearings aren't yet completed, and we will be working towards a good package for a development charges revenue source that makes sense. The Fewer School Boards Act is part of the package. It's lined up behind Bill 103, which is the City of Toronto Act. So when we finish with it, we'll get to the school boards next. We also have the Fair Municipal Finance Act, also at hearings right now. That act deals with the new assessment system. That's the act that creates the current value assessment system, and it has a number of assessment and tax policy features in that act. And I'm going to return to some of those in a moment. streamlining the administration of the Provincial Offences Act is also before the House, and that's the one that creates an additional revenue source for municipalities. That is one that, as soon as the Act is passed, the plan is to start some pilot projects immediately so that we can work through with a number of municipalities how that transfer actually happens, how the model agreements will work, and we can get that one underway very quickly as soon as the Act is passed. And that will be revenue that starts in 1997. The Local Control of Public Libraries Act is currently before the House. This ensures that the Municipal Council is in charge of the library board. They make the appointments, they have the accountability, they have the budget control. The Police Services Act, there was a question earlier today about the police services. So I went and made a phone call in the break to find out what some of the current thinking is about police services. They are at hearings right now. The hearings have not yet been completed. Not surprisingly, some of the police stakeholders are not as happy as municipalities with some of the features in the Act. There are a number of concerns around some of the discretion left to police chiefs concerning investigations of police activities. However, concern to municipalities, I think, one of the amendments that is being considered for the Act would be to clarify that police services can be purchased from a neighboring municipality and not just from the OPP. So that provision will be clarified, that is our intention, and the municipalities will have a choice of looking to find where the best service, least costly service, can be provided for policing in their community. And finally, the Water and Sewage Services Improvement Act will see the transfer of 14 plants to municipalities. There are a number of those plants that are in area schemes, and some conversations have started already about how to actually make an area system work in a new restructured sense. The transition team that I'm working on will be dealing with a lot of those issues as far as implementation is concerned, making sure that the tools are in place to ensure that those kinds of things can be implemented throughout the next year, year and a half. Later today, you're going to hear about the Municipal Act, so I'm not going to dwell on that at the moment. But that is obviously a cornerstone. That will provide the legislative authority for municipalities to act in a much more flexible way than they have in the past. The approach of a natural person's powers and setting out those governmental powers, because municipalities also need to tax, they need to regulate, they need to expropriate where appropriate, are going to be in the Act, and the design principle for that Act is to provide a flexible authority for municipalities so that not every single thing that you're allowed to do is written down, but rather you're allowed to do everything unless there are some restrictions. So it's written in quite a different kind of way. And it's much more wide open. Anything new that comes along, you don't have to come to the legislature in order to have it fixed in the Municipal Act. That would be accommodated in the wording of the Act. The Fair Municipal Finance Act is the one that sets up the new assessment system and new tax policy. We've already started some of the implementation issues and discussions around that Act. There's a whole need for assessment data, and we have a technical working group that's been working on that with municipal representatives. We've also started 2 other working groups that deal with what do you do once you get the assessment roll? How do you translate that into a tax you can collect next year? So there are a number of provisions in the Act dealing with phase-ins, dealing with new classes, dealing with how to deal with getting rid of the business occupancy tax. So we're going to work with a group of municipal folks in putting together a handbook on what these new changes mean, and also a software package so that you can do some what-if kind of analysis of what makes sense in your own community of applying these new tax rules. And both of these would be available to all municipalities. The provincial and municipal team will also be looking at the service delivery in the hands of the municipal sector for assessment services. And that's another piece of legislation that will probably have to come forward in the next few months. The Municipal Act, some more tax issues, and some more assessment issues will still need some legislative tune-ups in order to get them in place. We've got a whole range of implementation activities underway right now. In Kingston and Peely Island, ferries are a big issue, so we've got some working groups there looking at a business case for the Ministry of Transportation, putting together some proposals on some cost efficiencies, on improved efficiencies, alternative service delivery, those kinds of things. There are a number of other related issues. For example, Go Transit is very much related to what's going to happen with the Greater Toronto Services Board. And we have later on today Noel Farrell talking about some of those issues. And how we actually work through a new system for managed forests. It means that we have to talk to the Forestry Association, Woodlot Association, conservation authorities, and yourselves in how to make that new system work. The kinds of activities that all of this is also working in is restructuring. And we already have the minister's orders for 21 restructurings across Ontario. The number of municipalities involved have been reduced by these orders from 70 to 20. 19 additional proposals were received by the March 31st deadline, and we will be working to put those in place for this year's November elections. And we have one commissioner that has been appointed in Kent County. There are a couple of other very notable restructurings going on. Obviously, the City of Toronto, Bill 103. The issues surrounding the Greater Toronto Services Board. Services Board is coming forward. We have work going on in Ottawa Carleton, and we also have work going on in how to make a locally initiated process available to regional governments in the same way that county governments have it in Bill 26. So that's all in the works. The next steps, what other kinds of things are we going to be doing? Each one of those pieces of legislation and the programs involved in it are going to involve a great deal of implementation discussion. The transition team will be providing some overall guidance to that, but we are definitely going to have to draw in many more people as we get down to the nitty-gritty of how to actually make it work. And that will be supporting throughout the rest of this year and probably into next year, because everything will also need some fine-tuning once we actually launch the changes. So we have made provincially a very significant commitment in time and money to making sure that we have the tools in place for a transition on some of these very important issues. We have a commitment to education and training that we want very much to work through with our municipal partners to make this a joint learning experience. It's not just municipalities that need to learn. As I tell my provincial colleagues, we have to learn new ways of doing business, new ways of relating to the municipal sector. And therefore, it's very much an emphasis on joint learning. We're going to draw on the best practices from around the world and our own Ontario municipalities that have done a good job and can share that experience more widely. It's going to be an ongoing program. Rather than just have a day-long seminar on what's new in the Fire Services Act, the approach we want to take is let's look at what needs to be learned about putting together an integrated emergency services system. So what are all of the pieces? The legislation's just one of them. There are other pieces. There are human resources. There are technology. There are organization and design issues. There's contract management issues. It's that kind of learning that we want to promote over the next year or so. And we're going to launch some of this through a newsletter very shortly. And that kind of thing very much will be the kind of thing that the provincial and municipal transition team can provide some comprehensive guidance to what municipal needs are and to oversee the actual rollout and delivery of some of those features. So that's the kind of thing that we're planning at this time to get underway with a number of the features of Who Does What. There are a number of things that still have to be settled as far as legislation, and they mainly deal with the social and community health and social housing areas. But there are still some important tax issues that need to be settled, and we will be working towards getting all of that completed so that we have the legislative framework for 1998, and then we can work on the design and implementation throughout the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. That now opens it up to some questions from the floor. I think that we've heard quite a bit in terms of the proposed initiatives of the government, some of the issues and concerns and opportunities that the municipal sector sees, and followed up by the initiatives that are currently underway, as outlined by Dana. So, first question.
Okay, thank you very much. Marcel Brunello, Regional Councillor for Region of Durham and Deputy Mayor of the Town of Whitby. Ron, in his address, talked about municipalities, as we all do, and I belong to two municipalities, the Regional Municipality in Durham and the Town of Whitby. So when you say municipalities, I'm not sure which municipality we're talking about. And in view of this Greater Toronto Services Board thing that's around, which quite frankly we don't think too much of, more of that later, it's kind of cloudy. Should the municipality, should my communities are hurting as loin to deal with all of these things that are coming down? Or is the Greater Services Board going to supply it? Or are we going to be allowed to continue with our regional municipality in some form as our own local service board? There's just so many questions about who's going to do what yet that I really need some answers. So anybody can address that complicated question, I would sure appreciate any kind of sunshine we could have out of that.
I guess I drew the short straw on this one. There are a number of things that we do not have worked out yet, and that is one of them. And to be fair, I mean, we want to engage the municipal sector in order to determine what is the municipality in the 50 municipal service delivery areas that would be delivering the services for social services. Those decisions have not yet been made, and we do need to get on with making those types of decisions. We certainly recognize that, and that's one of our very, very top priorities, because that also then sets up how we look at sharing the cost, sharing the actual delivery, on and on and on. So I recognize the issue.
Okay, well, the problem is we have the minister, Mr. Leach, who are making comments like, well, we won't do anything with the regions right now, but we will in the future, which is fine, except when you're talking about accepting these levels of services, who's going to manage them? It is difficult to see. The region already at this point, our region does at least handle a lot of the social services.
Is that going to disappear? Are they going to continue? It's difficult. It's very difficult to imagine moving into the next future. We're facing a municipal election. We're going to be asked, what's going to be happening by our citizens? We're going to be asked to take positions on what services should be where, perhaps. And we have no information. I mean, it's all very fine to be in this transition team, but I don't know what you're working with. I don't know what you're working with, and that's what I really need to understand is where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Where do you think it's headed, even if you don't know? Give us something. We have nothing. We're out here, I'm going to tell you, we're out here scratching our heads. I'm sure counties are in exactly the same situation.
Marcel, if I can, there are, and I think the question is more about the mix, if you can, and what the transition team's doing to try and deal with the announcements. The process which we have established right now is that the two teams are sitting as one, that the decision amongst your colleagues, my colleagues who sit on that team, was that we would be dealing with the package, the basket of goods, the whole picture, if you can, before we moved into any transitional type items. We weren't going to move into figuring out the social services portfolio or figuring out long-term care or social housing until we had a mix that was comfortable. We don't have that yet. We are in the process, as your colleagues in the municipal sector, we have had a few meetings again as of the last weeks, and I'm heading to another one this afternoon. We have had senior staff from across the province come in and have went through about 96 million different options. We are in the process of going through those options this afternoon to see whether or not there is another basket of goods that the province and the municipal sector and the other stakeholders might find acceptable. We don't have that yet. That's where I'm heading to the next meeting. So I can't give you any information on the specifics because, quite frankly, we have not figured out what an appropriate mix is yet that the province and the other stakeholders will accept. We've done our homework. All that information is sitting there waiting for us today. We're meeting. We're going to go through it and try once again to see if we can come to some system, some basket that's acceptable to all. When we do that, as soon as we do that, I mean, the information will be out as soon as we can get it out. Until then, quite frankly, the teams are sitting, we're dealing with the basket of goods. The implementation items we're not interested in right now. We've said that. It's the basket of goods first.
Thank you.
There's a person at the microphone.
Thank you. I've been offered a chair to stand on. I made it
It's easier to hold the microphone.
It is. Well, I'm so short. First of all, will we be receiving hard copies of your presentations? All of you?
There are hard copies of mine available. I don't know why you want them, but yes.
Again,
I'm getting old and my memory's getting short.
on the hard copies, those that would like them, if they would just indicate under evaluation forms when they hand them in that they'd like a copy, we'll see that gets out to you.
Okay, thank you. That was not my main question. I have two questions for you. One of you mentioned about road taxes and what is being done with road taxes. Well, my question is, a large portion of gasoline, the price of gasoline is road taxes. Am I correct? A huge portion. So my question is, when you go to a marina to get gas for your boat, why does it cost more for the gas than less? Nobody has an answer to that, right? It's road tax. We do not. I haven't driven a boat on the road yet. Anyway, something for you to think about. All right, now to be serious. Preacher in a church says to his congregation, 25% of the world's kids will go to bed hungry tonight. A frightening number of those are going to bed after being emotionally and physically abused, some now to face sexual abuse. And you people don't give a shit. And you know what the real pity is? That you people are more concerned about the fact that I just said shit than what I said. about children. I'm on the Children's Aid Board of Directors for Simcoe County. And the funding for children's aids, will it be increased? Because the inquest into deaths of children in the care of the Children's Aid Societies has shown quite an alarming number. That number could be directly correlated to the fact that monies to fulfill the mandated services has been decreasing. Now, those mandated services are certainly justified, and cutting services is a travesty. So is there going to be more of an importance placed on funding for societies like the Children's Aid? I'm not letting you off the hook with this one. I'm not letting you just go home and think about it.
Is this on? I'm not trying to evade your question. I don't have any information on that at the moment. I know that it's an issue that's being seriously considered by the ministry. It's not an area that I'm specifically involved in as far as my day-to-day activities are concerned. But if I can get note of your name and contact, I will do my best to answer that question and get back to you on it.
Thank you very much. The people who are making the decisions on this, I would strongly recommend that if they've not come from a social service background in that regard, children's welfare issues, that they go and they spend some time in unit meetings and that they do some shadowing of some of the social workers. I've done it. It's a real eye-opener, and I don't know how these people do it on a day-to-day basis. And when service monies are being cut, it's appalling. It's a travesty. And I certainly hope that you give it serious consideration to increase those funds.
Thank you for your comment.
My name is Judy Spring. I am a counselor with the City of Oshawa, and my question is for Dan Richardson. Can you tell us when the handbook and software will be available on tax and assessment changes? Secondly, whether it will be available through the regional assessment offices? And thirdly, whether there will be assistance provided in analyzing the impact of assessment and tax reform to municipalities?
First of all, I, of course, should always preface my remarks that it is subject to the legislature and that the Fair Municipal Finance Act does get passed. So I will be an optimist and say that I'm certainly expecting that it will be passed. The software project is just underway, so it won't be available until the fall. But also you won't have the new assessment data, even in rough form, until the fall, and the roll is not going to be returned until early in the new year because of the current changes underway. However, the purpose of the software is indeed to do some of that testing for you on what it means to your municipality of these changes in assessment and the changes in tax, so that you would be able to make that kind of determination yourself. That is its purpose. And we will make it available to all municipalities, but we haven't determined the method yet. Okay?
Thank you very much. Will that software assist us in analyzing the impact of reforms?
It will help you. It will help you deal with what your revenue is. That software doesn't deal with what your expenditures are, so it will deal with your revenue.
Thank you very much.
Question over here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Anne Black, and I'm from the City of Barrie. I have two questions. One for Dana Richardson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm on the board of Barrie's non-profit, municipal non-profit housing. And if this housing is to be downloaded onto municipalities, how will the province deal with and protect, number one, the mortgage funding, number two, the rent-to income subsidies, and number three, adequate maintenance reserve for the properties involved?
All of those are important issues that we're looking at right now. We do not have our new reformed housing legislation put together yet. So those are indeed the types of issues that we're looking at as we're putting together the legislation. We also have a series of negotiations underway right now with the federal government and CMHC. So that is also tending to be part of this mix on how we will actually structure a new system that will look at those subsidy levels, the mortgage guarantees, and the other things that you talked about. It's all underway at this point.
Thank you. And my second question, if I may, is for Mr. Chuck. If municipalities are responsible for between 50% to 100% of the delivery of social assistance, should the municipalities not be able to have input into the regulations and standards set?
Can you hear me? This one works. Well, harkening back to what Terry said originally, we are in a stage right now where we're looking at the mix. Yes, the province has said initially the 50-50. To be quite candid, we expect AMO and the transition team members to be probably offering up different scenarios. They certainly have represented on behalf of the municipalities and you folks here that an inviolate principle is the pay-per-say issue. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm sure that we will be looking, once we resolve the mix, as Terry has alluded to, there's no doubt in my mind that there will be consultations held with developing the rules and regulations, respecting the principle of pay-per-se.
Thank you.
Question,
Thank you. My question and observations for Terry Mondell. You run a family business, you're an elected representative of the council, as I am, I should say, from South Aurora. You're president of AMO. I thought I was busy. I don't know how you do it. But serious note, my question has to do with clutter. When downloading occurs and our council receives notice of it and we have concerns, we fire off letters of concern to appropriate people, but usually we refer to AMO to act on our behalf as you do. The development insurance proposals that were brought to us were, as we've heard this morning, are being changed back to a lot closer to what they were. And quite frankly, they were because councils such as ours in the town of Aurora, across Ontario, simply shut down the development industry. If you're not going to pay when you come to us for the increased cost of services, we're not going to have you come, period. And so that kind of club, I think, has enabled us to have some fruitful discussions in terms of what happened with that initial proposal. Our question, Terry, is what club do you have at all in negotiations with the province with respect to the other downloading issues as a result of negative? Do you have, or do we have any club in negotiations, or is it simply a father-child relationship and give up take?
I think the situation we have now with the provincial government is one which is, I think, of grave concern to everybody. Obviously, there's significant impacts on municipalities across the province. In terms of clout or lobbying force that our association has, that our sector has across the province, I think you need to sit and just think about what some of the other groups have done in terms of lobbying and the successes they've had. And I think we've all known the successes or lack of successes of the school boards and what has been announced for them, their association, and the type of in-the-face, if you can, lobbying that they decided to take. I think you look very much at the labor movement and the types of in-the-face, again, to the government lobbying that they took and the successes that they had. There are probably only two groups that have been able to have the government pause, if you can. The doctors was one of them. And it's obvious they have a fair substantial clout in terms of the medical profession and institution across Ontario. And the other group that had or was able to have the province pause on some of the issues was the municipal sector. So I think we have a substantial amount of clout and a substantial amount of ability to make changes across the sector. I know that there have been concerns raised across the sector about our lobbying strategy. we decided early in '95 that we would work with the government. It's talked about at every meeting the board has. It's talked about at every meeting the executive has. We revisit it and revisit it and revisit it. We still think we have the right strategy. And quite honestly, we have made the government pause. They have said publicly in their announcements when they announced the transition teams that they would be reviewing all options, all alternatives that would meet mutual objectives of both the province and our sector. So I think that's a very positive sign. But I think what we need to continue to do is work together. I mean, this is not by any way an easy task. By any way an easy task. The information, getting the right information, trying to make sure what we're doing is best for the sector, it's not easy, and we need to stay together. And much like the development charges issue, we were successful in getting some changes to that, and I think we'll get some more, quite frankly. We got that because we hung together. And we need to do it again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Martin Silva from the City of Toronto. My question to Terry is, I have one for each of the panelists. I'll give them all three in a row. To Terry, is it true that you allowed the provincial government to choose the negotiators for AMO? To Dan, my question is, would it be possible, instead of giving us some fancy software packages, to just give us the numbers, the assessment, so that we could figure it out for ourselves? And to the gentleman on the, I'm sorry I didn't get your name. Ron. In the speech that you read, there was a part there that said about how it was your intention to create smaller, more efficient, more accountable government. And we in the City of Toronto don't quite understand the meaning of that phrase.
Martin, the answer to your question is that as in any other provincial task force which is set up, the province has the final say and did make the final say on the representation of the transition team. That's correct. They made the final say just as in any other provincial team which they have established over the years.
With respect to assessment, yes, you'll get those numbers. You can develop your own software. You can do it. The assessment role will not be actually returned until early in the new year. We will have rough data in the fall that people can start working with, and you will have them then.
I will try to answer your question on behalf of the government. The expectation has been all along that we feel at the municipal sector, if you're referring simply to the social and community health services and programs that we're involved with in the ministry, is that there's recognition, hopefully it's the correct recognition, that municipalities are closer to the needs of their communities. So in terms of the delivery of social and community health services, you have the best understanding. Metro Toronto is a shining example. For example, I asked the question earlier this morning about ethno-racial concerns because I have dealt with that issue. I don't think it's appropriate that, I don't think that the province is necessarily in the position to make those kind of determinations on behalf of more localized situations. So smaller and more efficient in the respect that if carrying through with our implementation plans, you recognize the needs of your various ethno-racial communities, for example. You know the strongest community organizations out there that are able to deliver the services. You're able to provide the input to identify those organizations and develop your funding mechanisms and design models appropriately in that respect.
Question from this side?
Thank you. For Mr. Mundell, I'm Helen Graham, County Simcoe. Recognizing that municipalities are a sector, but a very varied one, I wondered if you could, your executive, the board, put your minds to how you can effectively, on a transition team, represent these varied interests. If you have anything to share with us about any processes you thought about, we'd be grateful. Or if you're going to just have to run as fast as you can, and we're going to have to try and catch up with you. Thank you.
Well, I think what we are trying to do is make sure that we're representing the sector as best we can. I mean, that's obvious. In any of these processes, it's difficult. I remember the last disentanglement process with the previous government, and the representatives that represented our sector at that time were under considerable pressure from our sector. And I can tell you that your colleagues, my colleagues on the transition team, are very much feeling those pressures as we speak now. in terms of detail, I can tell you that to represent the whole sector, what we're representing clearly is the property taxpayer across the province. So what we're trying to do, in principle, what we're trying to do is to try and reduce or limit your risk, your liability, your exposure, and move very much forward to the pay-for-say model so that you can be accountable, you can control your budget, you know what you have, you can go out to your peoples in your communities, talk to them, ask them what it is they want, talk dollars and cents, talk levels of services, and you can deliver. Because in fact, you control those budgets, you control those services. I mean, that's where we're trying to go in simplistic terms, and I think as a sector, we've all talked about that for some time. How we actually get there, there are a variety of options. We are in the process, that's where I'm going later on today, to look at another group of options to see if there is something else out there that we may have been missing to date.
Just on a very mundane basis, our concern perhaps is that ANO will find itself having to give one answer that may have very big impacts for different geographical communities. I wonder how you might cope with that.
I think that's one of the things, and it's been one of the interesting parts of the discussion that the transition team has had, in that we come from all different parts of the province and represent different interests, different sectors if you can, me being a small urban community with a county council background and others from regional and large urban and north, south, center, east, west. We bring a varying group of opinions to the table. But as I said in my discussions to you earlier today, it really is amazing when you start to sit down with the people from the different sectors, from the different municipal types if you can, how similar the issues are and how similar the solution are. I mean, in Northern Ontario, there's a little bit of a different blend because of the problems with the assessment. They have some substantive problems in getting revenues. But people from Southern Ontario very much understand those concerns and understand that if we can help the revenue base, we can help them to become more sustainable by themselves long term. But it's really been amazing to sit at the table and listen to all the different people on the team and how well they have come together to try and represent the province as a whole. And to try, we've had some discussions on issues which have been different alliances, if you can. We've never got to the position where it's been a push-pull, quite frankly.
And I think this will be the last question. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Michael Beach, the Lord Mayor of Niagara-on-Lake. And my question is to Dana, and it is based on a comment that she made very early on in her presentation to us, that this was seen as a package. And I guess there are many things that are within the package that I could see a sense of agreement on. And I'm wondering why you would take the position of it being a full, complete package as opposed to finding some agreement on some of the areas that are on the table and getting them off the table.
Certainly in the announcements that the government made in January, we have put together a package that the government feels makes sense when we take into account the fact that getting education off the property tax is one of the core pieces to this package. And the type of package that we put together, we have tried to put it together in a way that is workable. But what the Premier and the ministers have said to the municipal sector, we are quite prepared to listen to some improvements on that package, but it's still, there are some parameters that the government feels are necessary in making that kind of change. The parameters are, we've made a commitment about getting education off the property tax. We've made a significant commitment to property tax reform. We have also made a commitment to provincial standards, where it is important to have consistent standards across the province. And the final piece is that we have a fiscal framework that we have to live within in Ontario. We have a goal to get down the deficit, and this is part of that much larger piece as we work through this over the next several years.
My last question is in relationship to, I support the principle of pay per se, and I think that's a good direction to be moving in. The challenge, of course, is in a region similar to where I come from, the region rather that I come from, it has a close to a $73 million deficit in terms of the, by our calculations on the information that we can attain. And I think that's a little bit more than pay per se. And I think that in relationship to that, the policy direction is really the area that I guess grinds me the most, in that we're being told that we have to pay, but the policies are still being dictated to us by the other funding partner, or lack of funding partner, I should say. And I'd like to know whether, in fact, the policy direction is going to be handed along with some of those decisions, or whether it's not.
There certainly
Just I'll highlight the things like farm tax rebate program. Rural municipalities are going to pay for the preservation of agricultural land, a provincial policy, very strangled. That's one that I think grinds our region significantly.
I think that it's important before a conclusion is drawn about what the community by community impacts are, to a point that Dan Burns was stressing earlier today. Until we get down to program by program cost allocation, it's going to be difficult to determine precisely what the impact is on an individual municipality. There are different ways that costs can be shared, different ways that costs will be experienced. There could be different ways in which even policing costs, I mean, let's just take a fairly non-controversial one, could be dealt with, whether you buy it from the OPP, or you buy it from a neighbor, or you do it yourself. Those are different ways of dealing with that particular cost. So until we get down to that kind of discussion and work it through with the municipal sector, and there is indeed a lot of room for say in all of that, because those kinds of decisions have not been made, then we can make the conclusions about how it impacts individually and whether and how much the transition funds can be used to assist municipalities in need.
Thank you very much. I guess it's a question of we can have our say, but not necessarily will everything be listened to.
On that note, I'd like to thank Terry, Dan, and Ron for the presentation and the responses to the questions. And as a small token of our appreciation,
the Central Regional Office of the Ministry in North York. I welcome everybody to the restructuring breakout session of our conference on change. It's here, it's now. So if you're not supposed to be in the restructuring session, this would be a great time to get up and leave, right? No, anyway, I do welcome everybody. We're really fortunate to have two speakers here today to talk about restructuring and implementation. And we're after I'll introduce both the speakers, and after we've had a presentation from each individual, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers as best as we can, and I'll try and coordinate and entertain them directly. So the two people that we have here today are Warden Leslie O'Shaughnessy. He's the Warden of United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, and he's the Reeve of the Township of Charlottenburg. So you'll notice a slight change in your program, and we're very fortunate to have Warden agree to come and talk to us. He, by profession, is a realtor in the Cornwall area, and he entered politics in 1991 when he became concerned with municipal issues in his area. He was elected the Reeve in 1994 and the Warden of the county in 1997, and has been a leading advocate of amalgamation and restructuring of the local, some 20-odd municipalities that compose the United Counties. So welcome, Warden. We also are very fortunate to have Dr. Peter Mayboom, who is presently in the position of the chair of the restructuring of Kent County in the Kent County and the city of Chatham. Dr. Mayboom has over the past 35 years held a variety of positions at a number of levels in both the local, municipal, provincial, and federal governments. And his skills are in management, mediation, public policy development, in a variety of areas. He is Ontario's first restructuring commissioner and is currently, as I mentioned, the commissioner for Kent County and the city of Chatham. Most recently, he's been involved with association management, mediation, and public policy activities, and was also appointed by the minister to chair the Who Does What panel on the Pension Municipal Administration Emergency Services Committee. So it comes with a wide variety of experience on municipal issues. Now, I'm not sure how many of you noticed, I brought a box of these guides on a guide to municipal restructuring, which I understand is presently out of print, and another version is being worked on, but I happen to have a few spare ones. But I think some of the remarks on the front of this guide are fairly useful and still quite relevant. In particular, the minister's introductory note is that he's saying basically congratulations on taking the very first step to your municipality as an efficient, cost-effective, making it as cost-efficient and as effective as possible. And it really is a step of a process. And he identifies that it's not an easy process, but that we're all working towards goals of more efficient, less costly forms of governance. Some of the other sort of interesting remarks along it is that it points out that there are two approaches to restructuring, and that's why we have both of the individuals here today. Warden O'Shaughnessy's experience is from a locally generated local agreement to a solution, and Dr. Mayboom was appointed by the province to, at the request of the local municipalities, chair a commission process. So there's two slightly different processes, but both being under the present legislation. What this doesn't deal with, I guess the guide, is for those of you in regional municipalities, or for those of you in the City of Toronto or the GTA. And those processes, as you know, are being dealt with somewhat a little differently in the City of Toronto, the legislation that's presently before the House to deal with the city itself. And the outside regions, well, in part through the Greater Toronto Services Board presentation that you've heard, a number of the issues on restructuring or service delivery and governance are being dealt with in part through that process, but in part in the longer term it will be dealt with, as Jana Richardson referred to this morning, on amendments and changes to the Municipal Act as they proceed and as it's discussed. So with that context of restructuring and encouraging you to grab this booklet, I'm going to turn it over now to Warden O'Shaughnessy.
Thank you. Everybody okay if I sit instead of as opposed to stand? Just before we start off, I'd just like to get a feel of who I'm speaking to. How many here are part-time municipal councillors or whatever? So they fooled you too, eh? Because certainly these days what is perceived to be a part-time job has certainly turned into something that you basically had to dedicate your life to. The restructuring that took place in the United Counties of Stormont and Dundas and Glengarry was a county proposal. When it first came forward, the Municipal Council felt that the Executive Committee of the counties would investigate the options that were available in regards to amalgamation. What we found out after the first meeting is that you had 20 municipalities with 20 different ideas of what some sort of new restructured counties or municipalities would be. The first meeting that we had in October 1995, which was attended by the 20 municipalities. Within the 20 municipalities, there's a separated city of Cornwall. From that meeting, we sort of didn't go anywhere. The city did not show interest in talking to anybody. The 20 municipalities were still at at loggerheads on what they felt should happen. So what happened is the executive committee or the county's council said, okay, go out and talk amongst yourselves. See if there's a willing for you to talk to the municipality adjoining. From that, other groups popped up that felt that because you were the United Counties, that you should meet at a county level. There it was discussed single tier, two-tier. Being in a two-tier system, there was a willingness from some municipalities to go to a single tier and separate. As time progressed, municipalities broke off in smaller groups. They basically couldn't agree with their neighbors. We went to situations where municipalities refused to talk to anybody. Early on in the process, there was letters written off requesting a commissioner. There had been nothing discussed, no proposal formulated, but already they were requesting commissioners because they could not agree with their neighbors. In our municipality, which is the township of Charlottenburg, we met, first of all, with an adjoining neighbor to discuss things that we may have of mutual interest. We approached it in the matter of, well, we're not going to amalgamate. We're going to share services. That'll satisfy the province of Ontario. They'll leave us alone and they'll go away. Well, we walked out of a meeting that took 2 hours, and all they wanted to share was computer software. That's it. We dropped them, went on to the municipality to the east. There, we did make some headway. We then asked the neighboring municipality to their east to come into the discussions. And we found out very quickly that there was a lot of things that we did that were identified as savings should we come together. In the counties, maybe I'll step back, and I'm getting a little bit ahead because it's very hard for me to tell you what happened. It took 1.5 years to do it in 10 minutes. It's just not there. We have 20 municipalities in a separated city. We're going down to 6 municipalities. We are going from 37 council members in the upper tier down to 12. We are going in our three municipalities, we're going from 15 people on council, 3 reeves and 12 council members, down to 5. We have created a scenario that does not incorporate ward systems. The municipalities originally had created an area, well, we want somebody from this area, somebody from that area, and everything. We sat down and we discussed, and what we resolved in our own minds is that if we're going to become one, we must think like one. So why create segregated areas within the new municipality? From there on, we got into the restructuring itself, and we said, cost, is it going to save us any money? We haven't looked at numbers. We haven't did anything to this date. Is it going to save us money? What we did resolve very quickly is if we came together, changed our name, kept all the employees, kept all of the buildings, kept all of the trucks, it's not going to cost us any more. It was a very basic philosophy. So if we come together and we stay the way we are, it's not going to cost us more. So possibly there is savings there if we come together and look for these savings. The municipalities in other areas of the counties looked at things a little bit differently. They still couldn't speak to each other, even though they had resolved that something was going to happen, and they chose to hire consultants. One municipality paid as high as $20,000 to come in and tell them what they already knew. Now they've got all of their residents a little bit upset because they've taken their tax dollars and they've spent them on people to make decisions for them, although they were the elected ones by the people. The areas of concern that popped up is the local identities. And if you can see in the Toronto area, you're having that also, where people feel that if amalgamation occurs, that you lose your identity. Well, we looked at it and we can't find where that concern is. In a hamlet area, in a region, or whatever, you still keep your own identity. You just become part of something bigger. Something that went over quite well. The people in our area were very concerned. We are one of the richest municipalities, our township of Charlottenburg, in the 20 municipalities of SD&G. The other municipalities in the amalgamation, one is not in dire straits, the other one has a lot of problems that need to be addressed. The issue comes up about dollars and cents, reserve funds, assets, liabilities. We had two choices at that time. We could either say, okay, you take care of your problems, we'll take care of our problems, we'll keep our money, you keep yours. Some municipalities were facing tax hikes that were a little bit out of the norm. So we went back and looked again because we didn't feel that it was right becoming one and putting a burden on one specific area. By the time we were finished, the money will be pooled. The money will become the money of the new municipality, the reserve funds, both the specified reserves and operating funds. There's been no protection. In some of the restructuring proposal, it identifies areas where reserves that are collected in one area will be spent in one area. Well, that's fair, or, you know, that might make a lot of sense when you're still thinking like that individual municipality. But if you're trying to expand your focus, you have to take into consideration that if there is something that needs to be done over here, it does become the liability of the new. So why strap one or the new municipality when you've got dollars sitting over here on the side? One of the biggest things, and what we perceive to be the smallest item in restructuring, was choosing a name. We chose the name in our respective municipality. You had Charlottenburg, you had Lancaster Village and Lancaster Township. We had businesses in the community, Charland. We had an arena that is referred to as the Charland Arena. We have a Charland High School. We're laughing, we think we got a name, it's Charland. We went to a meeting, we all agreed amongst ourselves, and to be honest, we had to fight for Charland because Lancaster Village, Lancaster Township said, well, there's two of us in one of yours, so we'll call it Landshar. Well, it just didn't have the ring. We go back, we finally agree, it's going to be Charland. The Santa Claus parade is coming up. We get a sign, Charland. Nice little equation sign that says this, this, and this equals Charland. Go to the parade, received very well. We get costumes, we put 30 kids on a float. Down we go. Don't hear nothing. 3 weeks later, the letters started to come. The phone calls started to come. I was receiving letters from Scotland. Glengarry is has a very historical background for the Scottish culture. Not one person called about the $3.5 million worth of reserves that were collected in that municipality. Not one call I received. Like I say, you go back. So, and some of the things and some of the statements that have been made by the province of Ontario where people don't care where they get their services from. It's a true statement, as long as it gets done. When you start getting in and affecting culture, history, anything like this, you're going to have problems. But that is the only area where we've received any problems at all in our amalgamation. And I could go on, and we've been all over the map here, but basically there is savings in restructuring, but you have to resolve yourself to look for them. I know that there's a lot of administrators and everything in the room, and there is a personnel issue that becomes a very touchy situation. Nobody wants to work themselves out of a job. In our case, our 3 clerks have done an exceptional job. They've sat back, they've provided information, they've provided different scenarios on doing things. And to me, that is going to be much better received by the people of your municipalities than if a consultant comes in and says, do this, and do this. Or a commissioner comes in and says, do it. So anyways, like I say, I could go on and on and on. But I think for any savings in any municipality, you have to look. And that's one thing that restructuring, or the Restructuring Act, has done. It's made you look at yourself. Because complacency in municipalities is rampant. For years and years and years, you did not have to do anything. But this has made you look at yourself. It's made you look at your neighbors. And in a lot of cases, there's positive things that are coming out of it. I told my wife before I left this morning, I was coming up to Toronto and to speak on restructuring, and I said, I don't want to get in a fight with anybody because I know it's not being as well received up here as it may be in the rural parts of the province. And I said, I'm just going to stand up and say, don't do it. I'll get a round of applause and then I can come home. But no, I think the first reaction that we had, the first reaction that all of the municipality had within our counties is no. And the majority of the time during the proposal, or developing a proposal, was just to have them say, maybe. These are the minutes of the meetings that transpired from October 95 until about November 96. And they tell you nothing. People weren't interested in looking at numbers. People weren't interested in identifying immediate savings. The people sat around the table and basically said, can we get along? Once the determination was made that we could agree, that we could get along, everything else fell in place. And it took a matter of about 2 months after that. So, anyways.
Oh, that's great. I thought maybe if you could hold your questions to the warden till after Dr. Mabel has spoken, and then we'll have a discussion on sort of approaches at that time. Do you want me to turn the lights off now?
No, I wouldn't start with that. Okay, I'll do that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to follow up on what Warden O'Shaughnessy has been talking about, because that is exactly, if that process fails, a commissioner can be appointed, may be appointed. So everything he said about his county applies to Kent County. Almost everything I heard applies to Kent County, with the big difference that in Kent County, people did not come to any agreement. And when I came there, I found a multitude of proposals, all of them competing with each other, and all of them leading to terribly hard feelings of people who used to be neighbors. And that has been the most difficult issue for me to deal with. People who really should be talking to each other were not talking to each other. They are now, because I'm there. And I will tell you how that all happened. First of all, I don't have to explain to you how it is that a commission comes about. It is when local restructuring is not getting anywhere, and there is a consensus, perhaps the only consensus in a community, that a commission should be appointed. And then there is a request to the minister, and the minister may say yes or no. And in the case of Kent County, he said yes, and appointed me. The big difference between the request from the local municipalities and the county and my terms of reference are that the separated city of Chatham, which is right in the heart of the county, is included, much to the consternation of Chatham, as you can well imagine. Now, the terms of reference, the first part of the terms of reference is all process, and the process is terribly well defined in the regulation. And for those of you who don't know yet, I refer you to the regulation under the Ontario Municipal Act 557/96. It's a very important document. And many people have not really examined that document, even in Kent County. And they say, why is it that you do this or that you do that? So I have to tell them, according to section so and so, that is what I have to do. And there is a great deal of misunderstanding, because many people think that the commissioner comes in as an arbitrator between competing views. Many people think that the commissioner comes in to take an opinion poll. The commissioner is charged with the responsibility to come up with a restructuring proposal. And whether it has a majority support or not is immaterial. And that's a very important switch. And I'm almost reading out some of my conclusions right now, but it's important before I give you my presentation to understand that. Because Ontario politicians, from the Premier down, have been saying, we rely on local solutions. You must find a local solution. We do not want to impose a solution. So that is the mindset of elected officials, that it shall be a local solution. When the local solution cannot be found and a commissioner steps in, an entirely different process takes over. And a commissioner may try to use as much of a local solution as he or she can find, but that may not always be possible. So what is a very democratic process with respect to finding a local solution may not necessarily be seen to be a democratic process when a commissioner comes in. And it's a very important switch in mindset to make. The democracy with respect to the commissioner is the Municipal Act and the regulation under the Municipal Act, because that was approved by a duly elected government and passed through the legislature. So there is a democratic process behind this famous regulation that I just gave you the number of. So that's where the democracy is. But to think that a commissioner necessarily has to follow the majority opinion is not necessarily the case, even though I tried to use as much as I could from what I found. So the mandate is very heavy process oriented. You must have public hearings, you must meet with all councils, you must do this, you must do that, that is. You must make available everything that is being written to you. And I've received hundreds of letters and hundreds of submissions. So first of all, I met with all the municipal councils, and in Kent County there are 21 of them. And then there's the City of Chatham and the County Council. So there are 23 governments in an area that you will see on the map in a minute, because I will show you some slides, with 110,000 people approximately. So we have 23 governments and some 130 elected representatives in this relatively small area. And the City of Chatham in the middle, it is pre-Confederation territory. When Upper Canada was split up between East and West districts, the Western district was Kent County, what is now Kent County, and Lambton County and Essex. So it is a very historical territory, and you will see some of that in my slides in a minute. So that's an important point, because people have been used to this kind of government, since Confederation, in fact, and they value it. So I met with all municipal councils, and they made their views known to me. And what I found was a multitude of proposals, ranging from one township simply wanting to separate from everything and go on their own. Separate from the county and not separate from Canada quite, but almost. Exceedingly independent. And then, over time, they went through a similar process as Warren has just described. They had come up with sort of three broad ideas. The first idea was referred to as uni-county. And that was a one-tier government for the entire county. No more municipalities, no more county, just one government with some kind of an elected body. It was referred to as uni-county. The second proposal, without the City of Chatham. The second proposal was entirely theoretical, and that was uni-county plus the City of Chatham. And that was referred to as uni-city. Some called it mega-city. Of course, everybody calls things mega these days. And the third proposal was close to getting a majority. And that was referred to as 5+1. And that would be an amalgamation of existing municipalities geographically located, and you will see in a minute what I mean by that. 5 municipalities with a board of management over it. And that board of management would choose where they would buy services. It was very strongly influenced by the Frontenac order, the Frontenac solution. They call that the 5 one-tier model. And then this board of management, well, they really didn't give that a name. But in fact, it was a 2-tier system, but no council at the upper tier, only the mayors of the constituent municipalities. 5+1, and the 1 in brackets was the silent partner in the deal, being the city of Chatham, who would sell them all the services. That was the idea. So that's what I found. And I listened to all the submissions, and then the process requires that the Commission issues an interim proposal. And I did that, but I didn't come down one way or the other. I gave 2 possible models. And the first model was that of a 2-tier system, strengthened, streamlined, by amalgamating the municipalities into 5 constituent municipalities and the city of Chatham. So there would be 6 municipalities and a county government. And that is very much in line with what the Crombie panel recommended. You may remember that the Crombie panel had all kinds of subgroups, and one of them dealt with governance. And they spoke about governance in the north, and governance in the rural areas, and governance in the regions, and governance in Toronto. So the Crombie panel said, you know, by and large the county system is a bit too heavy, and if you could reduce the number of constituent municipalities in the county, you know, but keep the county structure in place, and bring in the separated cities wherever they exist. That was the Crombie model. The second model I presented was in fact an elaboration of the uni-county model that existed locally. In other words, 1 level of government for everything, including the city of Chatham. And what would be municipalities in the 2-tier systems, I would call wards in the 1-tier system. And I issued that document, and then I met with all municipal councils again, and I met with the population. One day, 10 minutes per person. We started at 9 and we finished at 11 at night. And it was quite an emotional day, because people feel strongly about these matters. What I learned was that the municipal councils, almost without exception, opted for the 2-tier system, and the citizens did not opt in majority for the 1-tier system, but there was a very significant component among taxpayers who wanted to have a 1-tier system. With the exception of the town of Wallaceburg, which is afraid of everything that is going to happen because they fear that they're going to be a suburb of Chatham. There were people who recited poetry, who came and sang songs. They gave me gifts. That was quite an extraordinary event that day. And there were about 300 people in the room, or 200 some in the room, and they were still there at the end of the day, pleading with each other and with me, you know, to do this or to do that. What was interesting, though, is that whether Chatham should be in or out was not a point of debate at all, except for the city of Chatham. They passed a motion saying, you know, we don't want to have anything to do with this. Well, too bad. The minister has ordered me to somehow include the city of Chatham, and they know that. So they are thinking about it. So the public consultation was over, and then I realized there were so many loose ends